What's up, my fellow small business supporters? I'm Savvy, and welcome back to Savvy Writes Books, the channel where we talk about books and business and also occasionally cover topics related to the LGBTQ community and topics surrounding that as well. That type of discussion does often tie into books. I review a lot of LGBTQ books and stuff like that on this channel, and we do actually have a book review coming soon on this channel of the book by Bethany Mandel, the Twitter Karen, the one called Stolen Youth, which is mostly just fear-mongering about the LGBTQ community indoctrinating our kids and all of that, so that will be coming next week. But first, there is another issue that we need to address that is shockingly similar in the types of rhetoric to what is going on there. Now, a couple weeks ago, I put out a video on this channel about the Dad Challenge podcast, a guy named Josh who lives in Canada, and how his channel, in my opinion, has kind of skewed away from just protecting kids online and just talking about ending the exploitation of children, and he has, in addition to that, started to really push this anti-LGBTQ conspiracy theory on his channel. We see a lot of people like Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro, those types of people out here, I mean J.K. Rowling as well, saying things about how people are being indoctrinated into this, that this is some type of social contagion, things like that. And it was really disheartening to see someone who claims to be an advocate for kids kind of pushing this misinformation and this conspiracy theory out there. We're gonna have a lot more receipts, I guess as they say, a lot more specific things to discuss in this video, but there is an update on the situation. After I posted that video, right after that, Josh kind of posted a community tab post about this, which he then deleted. But then just today, on the day that I'm filming this, which is a couple weeks after that, he ended up posting a video talking about this topic and talking about the ways that he thinks LGBTQ visibility and that type of thing is harmful to children. And the video, there are some points that I agree with when it comes to families not exploiting kids online or not putting kids in the spotlight. There are some points that I agree with regarding that, but when it comes to his understanding of what being gay or trans or any of that actually is,
we're all homos. Homo sapiens.
He's just spreading a ton of misinformation, which is incredibly harmful at a time when a lot of places, especially throughout the United States, are actively in the process of passing legislation that could harm the LGBT community, and in a lot of places already is. So I really do want to push back on this misinformation. I want to kind of go through some of the stuff that he said, especially in his recent video, but also in a lot of the tweets that I've seen, and sort of start debunking some of that, sharing some information about what the truth behind a lot of these rumors actually is. So if you'll stay tuned for that, that is going to be our topic for today. I'll see you guys there.
Get you some nuts.
Yeah, you effing.
Up yours, woke moralist. We'll see who cancels who.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new, welcome for the first time. I'm Savvy, and this is Savvy Writes Books. If you're new here, please don't forget to take a minute to subscribe to this channel and to ring the notification bell, because multiple times a week I have new videos coming out on this channel, and I hope you guys will join me for them. In addition to that, I want to say thank you to my Patreon supporters. Today's video was brought to you by my Patreon supporters. Their names are up on the screen, and also if you check out the description below, you can look at links from my Patreon supporters that have given $5 a month and up. That is the reward I offer for $5 a month and up, is to promote your own links in my description below. So I hope you're enjoying that. And if my Patreon sounds like something interesting to you, you can check out the link to that in the description below as well, because that's where I post a lot of my behind the scenes blog posts, more personal stories and discussions, things about my writing process, my process of running a business. And lately I've been posting a lot of sneak peeks of upcoming books that I have coming out, so that's a lot of fun as well. So you can check that out in the description below. But without further ado, let's get into today's topic about the Dad Challenge podcast. First, I would like to give a shout out to a couple of other people that I've seen getting engaged with this topic and following this topic along and producing content about this topic. I'm very glad to see people kind of pushing back on the message that he's sharing. One creator I want to give a shout out to is a YouTuber named Erica Moans. I have been following her channel for a little while, and I saw some of her stuff like back when she posted some business guru stuff and things like that, but just recently I saw that she put out a video about this topic as well, about Dad Challenge podcast and the misinformation that he's spreading. So I highly recommend you guys check out her video as well, because I'm just grateful that other people are talking about this topic too. In addition, I'd like to give a shout out to one of my regular viewers on this channel and a regular participant in my chat, a trans woman named Fight Mage Studio, who has become a friend as well. She has been on Twitter fighting the good fight, actively being patient and engaging and spreading correct information with Josh on there and trying to open up that dialogue. I will be reading some of the tweets as well that she shared about this, because I think she's been doing a great job trying to have an honest conversation and educate him about this, which I really appreciate a lot. So we're gonna get into his new video that he just posted, but before that, I want to kind of go back chronologically to where this all happened. So a couple weeks ago, I posted a video on this. After I posted that video, Josh came into my comments to talk to me about it, which I think is totally fine, by the way. Like, if he ever makes a video about me, I'm sure I'll talk to him about it in the comments too. I remember a couple years ago, a multi-level marketing recruiter named Tim Sales put my face in one of his thumbnails, and I argued with him in the comments. I don't think there's anything wrong with arguing with people in the comments about your own videos and things like that, but I also am going to argue back because I disagree with the points that he was sharing. So let's take a look at that right now. All right, so the first comment he left was on Monday, March 27th, which was the day that I first released the video. He left me a comment that said, "How dare anyone have the audacity to not agree with your stance on this topic? You're not gonna like my upcoming video, lol." And I pretty clearly said at the end of my video that I didn't want Josh to be canceled. I wasn't out here trying to say that he is a terrible person or is irredeemable. I, in fact, offered to him directly that if he wanted to have a conversation about this topic and discuss this in depth, that I was open to that. But more and more, I'm just seeing him digging his heels more into the ground on this topic and not being open to listening to actual LGBTQ people talking about their experiences and talking about what's actually going on and showing that some of that misinformation is incorrect, which I am going to show in a few minutes. So it just seemed like a very disingenuous argument to say, oh, how dare I have the audacity not to agree with you, when in fact I said, if you don't agree with me, I'm open to discussion. I specifically said that. So it felt like a complete misinterpretation of what I was saying and what my video was saying. But then there was a part where he said, "You're not going to like my upcoming video." For a while, I waited to see if he was going to drop some kind of video about this topic, and he didn't for a couple weeks. And then finally today, on the day that I'm filming this, he did drop the new video, so it did eventually come out. The same day as that, like kind of right after I posted my video on this, he posted a community tab post that said, "When it comes to the trans issue and drag queens and all that other stuff, it wasn't ever a problem with me. That all changed when you came for the kids. Get ready for today's video. We draw a line in the sand." And so at the time, I was like, I don't know how to respond to that because you said they came for the kids without any proof of what that actually means. When I'm going to engage with what he's actually saying in the video, where I believe is his examples of how he personally thinks that this is harmful to kids, we'll engage with those in good faith. We'll talk about them in that video. But he said, get ready for today's video. The video actually came like 2 weeks later, so that's okay. You don't have to put it out right away. This post eventually got deleted.
Delete.
I'm not really a fan of people using language like the trans issue. I'm not here to be nitpicky about language, but the trans issue, it just sounds... I don't want someone to try to invoke Godwin's law on me over here, and you guys know what I'm getting at with that, right? When you try to boil down an entire demographic of people to an issue or a question, you know what I'm saying about that, right? A lot of people start off by saying, oh, I don't want to get rid of these people. I just want to treat them as if they are a question or an ideology or an issue. We know what that leads to, right? I'm not going to say it out loud, but we know what that leads to. That's all I'm going to say about that, okay? Later in the comments, he and I got into some more discussions about things. He asked me at one point, what is a woman? Which kind of debunks the whole thing about how he said he never had any problems with trans people at all until something happened with kids, I guess. He said he had no problem with them at all. I don't know why he's asking me what is a woman, because when it comes to the word woman, we can all agree that the word woman means someone who is not a prepubescent child. So we're talking about adults in this case. So if he's asking me about trans women, those are not girls or boys or children, they are women. So I'm not sure how this relates. So it makes it seem like his whole thing about I don't have any issue with trans adults is actually a lie, and there's more proof of this that we're going to see in a second. But he asked me what is a woman. I linked him. I said, lucky for you, I made an entire video on this topic. My definition of woman comes about 19 minutes in, but I recommend watching the whole thing for context and research. I linked my video reviewing Matt Walsh's book, What is a Woman, which I will also link in the description of this video. That video has all of my sources, all of my research on this. I don't want to have to pull up the same sources and the same research a million times because people keep spouting the same incorrect points about things, but that video has a whole bunch of sources in the description below. You can watch that video in full. I do define the word woman in that video for anyone who tries to claim that I don't. I do give a succinct definition of it, in addition to trying to place what it could mean in context and things like that. But that video has a lot of sources in it, so I linked him to that that video. He didn't really have a response to that. Now, a lot of the stuff I've been seeing him post on Twitter has solidified for me that this isn't an issue about kids. He actually does just have a problem with trans people. Here are some examples, because as you will notice as I go into these, none of these things that he's talking about are about kids or influence on kids or kids making decisions too early or anything like that. This is all in a vacuum. This is all about adults, okay? So here's a thing that he posted on Twitter. He said, "Do you think women, if they want them, deserve spaces without biological men in them?" Someone replied and said, "Everyone has the right to feel safe, but this is such a piss-poor example of why women should have safe spaces. How about autonomy over their own bodies? Women can't even feel safe in their own skin. Masking your transphobia with concern for women is wild." And he replied and said, "Transphobia to me has lost all value as a term, so that won't work here. These women are speaking up and calling them transphobes for doing it is lazy and just ain't cutting it anymore." So there was one thing about the whole safe spaces for biological women. We'll get into the nuances of that in a second. Later, he was arguing with someone about something on Twitter, and when he disagreed with them, he said pronouns in bio, opinion discarded, which is a stupid argument. It's the same thing as if someone says, "You paid Elon Musk for a blue check mark, opinion discarded." There's the other side's version of it. I think that's stupid too. You're not actually engaging with the point. Whether someone has a blue check mark or puts their pronouns in their bio is unrelated to the things they're actually saying. Engage with the argument, or GTFO. Later, as one of his points about how he thinks that drag queens are being harmful to kids. I'm not going to show the picture here because the picture's disgusting. He posted a photo of a kid out at a parade, and there were some adult men dressed in leather bondage type of gear, and the kid was going up to them and saying hi, which I understand the difficulty there. I personally don't think people should be bringing kids to that type of event in the first place. However, this is once again completely unrelated to drag. These were people dressed up in something that was a sexual costume, and I believe these were cisgender men in the photo. I don't believe there were any trans people or any drag queens necessarily either in this photo. And that's basically what the person who responded to Josh said, saying, "This is a photo of two men participating in kink play in public. This has nothing to do with trans people or drag queens. People of all sexuality should not be practicing kink in public. These are two different arguments. Take your L and go honestly." To which Josh replied, "Drag is arguably kink." Well, since we have established that Josh has dressed up as Micah Stauffer on his channel, are you saying you were getting off on that then? Because that's a little weird. I'm sorry, I'm not here to kink shame, but my whole point is most people don't see drag as kink. No, most people see drag as either a costume or a way to express the way that they want to dress. And by that logic, I would ask, what is drag? If you're going to ask me what is a woman, I want to ask you what is drag? Because the definition I've always known drag as is somebody dressing in clothes that would stereotypically and historically not be associated with the gender that they are. So I've seen drag queens and drag kings. I've seen cisgender women, sometimes butch lesbians, dressing up as masculine, putting on a beard, that kind of thing. I've also sometimes seen, cisgender men dressing up as women, as drag queens. But then I've also seen even cisgender women doing a woman's drag costume based on the style. There's no hard definition saying this is drag and this is not, but to say that all drag is kink is very weird and uneducated, and also comes from, in my opinion, a place of sexism, because if you're saying that someone dressing outside of gender norms is for a sexual purpose, then you're basically saying that it's not normal, it's only for sexual gratification to dress outside of gender norms. Let people have the autonomy to do as they please with their own body. That's all I have to say about that. If I want to dress up in a masculine way, that's my choice. If you want to dress up in a feminine way, that's your choice. It has nothing to do with being sexual, and it is not inappropriate for children. Okay? Let's continue. This post is both LGBTQ phobic and ableist at the same time. So he's responding to Ollie London. We're not even going to get into who Ollie London is. That's a whole mess. So Ollie London says, drag company Drag Syndrome features vulnerable people with Down syndrome dressed in drag paraded around on stages and made to perform at LGBT bars across the world. Dad Challenge replied, "This isn't real. There is no way." Okay, people with Down syndrome are still autonomous human beings. Neurodivergent people are human beings. Disabled people are autonomous human beings, okay? All of these people, we're all humans, we're all equal, we all have the ability to make choices for ourselves. So from everything I've seen, Drag Syndrome is a real performance group. They are a group of people who have Down syndrome and perform in drag shows. What's the problem with that? From everything I've seen in these pictures, there's nobody who's making them to perform, there's nobody who's grooming them to perform. To imply that someone who is an adult even can be groomed, especially if you're talking about an adult who has a disability or who is neurodivergent, you are making it seem like you you don't think that adult is a true adult with full autonomy. You are infantilizing another person based on their own medical history, based on any specific medical conditions they may have. That is by definition ableist. That is you discriminating against people based on disability. That is disgusting. If people who have Down syndrome or who have anything or who don't or whatever want to dress and perform however they want, that hurts nobody. Get the fuck over it. So just in case we thought this was really about kids all along, here's a tweet. Josh quote tweeted a thing called End Wokeness, always goes well, and it said, meanwhile in Canada, and it shows somebody who is, I believe, a drag queen, someone who is dressed in a stereotypical drag queen type of style, standing at a podium and giving a speech about protecting LGBTQ rights. Josh says, Canada, ladies and gentlemen, could these people have lobbied their existence while not looking like clowns? How can we take these people seriously? Do they dress like this every day? Also, they can exist in peace. Just stop bringing the kids into it. It's easy. So this is literally just like 1980s John Hughes movie style bullying. That's what this is. You're saying these people are dressed weird and therefore you don't think they deserve respect.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
You're saying you don't like the way that this person's style looks. You think their makeup's bad. You think their clothes are bad. And therefore we shouldn't take them seriously.
That is the ugliest effing skirt I've ever seen.
That is a disgusting, I mean, it's not just disgusting, it's fallacious. It's an ad hominem. We've talked about logical fallacies before on this channel, right? We've talked about the ad hominem fallacy, which is when you attack a person rather than their argument. So to say that someone shouldn't be taken seriously because in your opinion, you think that the way they're dressed is silly or makes them look like a clown, that is not only bullying, it's also an inaccurate way to argue with someone. It doesn't have any basis in actual logic. So what you're doing there is just straight up bullying someone for not liking the way that they dress. You're taking me right back to middle school, Josh, back when I would get bullied for dressing too quirky, for wearing outfits that were too weird and being too artsy, right? That's all you're doing. You're just being a middle school bully with that shit. So then someone tweeted to Josh, because Josh has been talking a lot about drag and thinking that drag is bad or whatever. So they tweeted pictures of Josh dressed as some of the mom vloggers that he criticizes, him dressed as a woman, dressed as those mom vloggers. And someone said, is this normal? But I'm sure your excuse for dressing in drag is more valid, right? Josh replies with, lol, this is definitely as bad as this for sure. My content is for adults. I am not dressing like this and trying to appear in front of children. I am making fun of child exploiters. But yes, I see it's exactly the same. I hope you stretched for a while before this enormous reach. The picture that he tweeted that he was referencing in this tweet, I'm not going to show on screen either because it's also disgusting, but it is a picture of a child at some type of event, and there is a person who appears to be dressed like a stripper who is wearing pretty much just underwear, and a child is putting money into that person's like thong string. It's really gross. I completely agree with Josh that that picture is inappropriate, that picture is disgusting, and that child should not have been in that situation. Josh, we agree 100% on that. Where we don't agree is that this has anything to do with drag. I even pointed this out on Twitter. I told him that this picture is not of a drag queen. That picture was of a cisgender woman, by which I mean a biological woman is what they might say, although that's not, we're going to get into the nuances of that in a minute too. But that picture was of a female stripper stripping, and someone brought their kid to the event. Why? Because they're shit parents, I'm assuming. I can agree that the kid wasn't supposed to be there, but that performer was not a drag queen. That performer was a stripper. That performer is not male in any way. There's nothing to do with drag in this sense. So why, when someone compares you dressing as a woman, no one was dressing as a woman, that's just a stripper. So that was an inappropriate situation, but I don't know why you're bringing that up in an LGBTQ discussion. There was no proof that the woman in that photo was associated with LGBTQ anything at all. She just could be like a straight woman who's a stripper. Like, I don't understand what that has to do with LGBTQ people. We can agree that it's not okay, but we can't agree that it says anything about trans people, LGBTQ people, drag queens, anything like that. That's just an unrelated topic. All right, here's where we'll get a little more into the stuff about trans adults and the stuff about biological women and segregation and things like that. So Josh here says, when it comes to the trans issue, we're back to the trans issue, okay. Call it what it is, call it the trans question, Josh. When it comes to that, I think level-headed people only really care about, one, the impact this ideology has on children and the youth of today. It's destructive in so many ways. Two, bio women who want sex-inclusive spaces should be able to have that if they want it. Three, if you were once a bio male, you should not compete against women. That's it. The rest is up to you because it doesn't impact anyone else. Once it starts impacting others is where people started having an issue. So let's point out a couple things in this tweet. First of all, he keeps calling it an ideology. I don't know why you're calling something an ideology when it's a demographic. There is a difference. An ideology is your worldview. It is your view on the world. An ideology is like your views on different policies, your views on whether you think healthcare should be covered by the government or privatized and done by private companies. That's an ideology. It's an ideology to discuss whether you think that the world should take a collectivist or individualist approach to wealth redistribution. Those things are ideologies. Demographics of people are not ideologies. So like, I'm a white person. Am I part of the white ideology? Like, I'm a Polish American. Am I part of the Polish American ideology? I'm from Chicago. Am I from the from Chicago ideology?
The Bears.
No, that doesn't make any sense. I was born in 1992. Is being born in 1992 an ideology? Like, no, it's a demographic. It's a way of categorizing people. Trans people, just like all types of LGBTQ people, are not an ideology. They are a demographic. And when you call it an ideology, you are implying that you think that this is a choice, that this is someone just choosing to want to be LGBTQ rather than knowing inherently that that's the way that they are. There is a difference, okay? There's a difference between an ideology and a demographic. But I'm not here to nitpick language, so let's move on to the next thing. Let's talk about number 2. Biological women who want sex-inclusive spaces should be able to have that if they want it. So there's a lot of logical hangups I run into when people bring this up. First thing, when you say biological women, how are you defining that? Are you defining that as person who has a vagina? Because we're going to take a look at his video that he just recently put out, and in that video he has a lot of shit to say about Jazz Jennings, who has openly had bottom surgery and has talked about that, and has also been taking estrogen for a long time, and has also been blocking testosterone for a long time. So by that logic, she is now a biological woman, right? Because she, other than if we're going solely by chromosomes, which once again, there have been cases of women being born with XY chromosomes and being able to still give birth and things like that. So that alone doesn't determine biology. Once again, if you want the full breakdown of what is a woman in that whole categorization, look at the Matt Walsh video below. I don't want to just repeat myself all day long. But if we're going to go beyond that, let's say that for the sake of the argument, Josh is defining biological woman as has a vagina. How is that going to be enforced? How is it going to be enforced? Because all I'm seeing as a result of this, as a result of people having a moral panic about mixed gender or mixed sex spaces, all I'm seeing as a result is people now trying to figure out who could be trans, figure out who could secretly have genitals that you might not think they have, things like that. All I've seen is it lead to an increase in sexual harassment and lead to more people making others feel uncomfortable. I would be extremely uncomfortable if, because I am a woman who is tall and broad-shouldered and lifts weights, if somebody assumed that maybe I wasn't born with a vagina and saw me and said, Savvy, can we see your vagina to make sure that you really belong in here? Now I've been sexually harassed, okay? So I as a woman got sexually harassed as a result for that. Like, do you see how it's impossible to enforce this without it eventually leading to the sexual harassment of women? Second of all, the argument here is that, okay, women want to have spaces where they're not worried about being assaulted by men. They're not worried about being assaulted in the bathroom. They're not worried about being assaulted wherever. First of all, bathroom doors, even if we are to separate bathrooms based on genitalia, there are not armed guards outside of bathroom doors. A man can sneak into a woman's bathroom anytime he wants. And if we're going by sex segregated spaces, you could have a transgender man, somebody who is for all intents and purposes looks fully male, going into a woman's bathroom, who has been taking testosterone for a while, is a lot stronger. Would that intimidate a woman in just the same way, even though that person doesn't have a penis? How would you know if they had a penis unless you asked? On top of that, if we did suddenly normalize it that transgender men were going into the bathroom with women when they still had a vagina, that at that point, that means that a cisgender man could theoretically say he's a transgender man and pretend he has a vagina, but because he looks male, it doesn't matter because he's like a lot of trans men look male. Right? You see what I'm saying? So there's really no way to enforce people not going into the bathroom that you don't want them to unless you're literally inspecting their genitals, which is sexual harassment. So this is what I've said all along. There's an easy-ass solution to this, and that's that there should be a law that building codes, if you are going to have a public bathroom in a building, that the door has to lock from ceiling to floor. If we had that as a law in every public building, this would not be an issue. I went to a bar the other week where the bathroom, when you went in, there wasn't a men's or women's bathroom, there was just bathroom. You walked into the bathroom, there were like 10 stalls lined up, and the stalls, the door locked from ceiling to floor. You went in the stall, it was like a little cubicle, you locked the door, and then when you go out and wash your hands, that's a sink. You wash your hand, like washing your hands at a mixed gender sink doesn't do anything. The part where your pants are actually off of your body, you are fully covered. Because that's also another thing to keep in mind too, is that that there are women who have been assaulted by other women. There are men who have been assaulted by other men. In fact, the most common type of assault and abuse is adult to child. And I think Josh would agree with me on that based on the fact that his whole channel's mission was supposedly about protecting children. So the whole idea is that, so when it comes to people being assaulted or being harmed, the way that's most likely to happen is adult to child. That's the most common type of abuse. We don't separate bathrooms, adult bathrooms and children bathrooms. We don't have adult locker rooms and children locker rooms. Should we? At the end of the day, because anyone is capable of assaulting or harming anyone, we should just have fully locking doors in a place where anyone who's going to get naked. Like, I just don't see how there's any solution other than that. And then there's this whole thing about, like, should women with vaginas have access to their own spaces if they want them? I don't know. How far are we going to take that? Because then you can go back pretty quick to having people saying like, well, I want a space with only my own racial group. If someone says that, if someone says they want a space with only their own racial group, that was a cause for segregation just a few decades ago in this very country, right? I mean, this was even a panic back in like the 80s and 90s when people would say things like, I don't want to share a locker room with someone who's gay. Like a woman might say, I don't want to change in the locker room with a lesbian because she's attracted to women and I could get assaulted. How are you going to control for all of those factors? Once again, the only way you can control for those factors is a fully closing locking door. If people want spaces, if someone's out here like, well, I personally want spaces that are just for people with my genitalia, tough shit. If you're going into a public place, you're going to have to meet other people who are different from you. And that's not to say that people should have to change in front of people if they feel uncomfortable with them, but that is to say that I think buildings, if you're going to have a space where people are taking their clothes off, it should be required that you provide a space where the door locks ceiling to floor. I think that should be a law. Other than that, there's no accounting for the wide variety of factors of what people could potentially be afraid of. Okay? For a side of the aisle that's usually talking about not wanting people to be special snowflakes or to feel entitled to everything, it's extremely entitled to expect that the world is revolving around your specific fears. That doesn't make any sense. Stay in your house if that's how you feel. Then the third point, if you were once a bio male, you should not compete against women. Once again, I've said this before and I'll say it again. When it comes to sports categorization, that needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis. The idea of trans people arriving at elite levels in sports in the first place happens so infrequently. The times it has happened have all become high-profile cases because it's only happened a couple of times, and each of those situations should be taken on a case-by-case basis. I will highly recommend a video by Samantha Lux, who is a transgender woman herself. She made a YouTube video about sports segregation, and she showed a lot of research and a lot of studies showing how when trans women go on estrogen and block testosterone, how they lose a lot of their muscle mass and they lose basically the entire advantage they would have had over a cisgender woman. She has a lot of examples and studies to show this, but that doesn't mean, like, for example, we saw an example with Janae Marie Kroc, who was the woman that Blair White had spread a lot of misinformation about a while ago. This woman, when she transitioned pretty far into her athletic career, and she was already extremely strong. She had been competing against men, and so at that start of her transition, she said, I'm going to choose to continue competing against men because that seems like the fairest thing for me. Meanwhile, if you get a transgender person who started puberty blockers at 12 years old, never fully went through male puberty to begin with, started estrogen at 16, and then got their surgeries done in their 20s. That's a rough timeline, but it's one that I see commonly happen with trans people. Let's say that is the timeline that they went through. By the time they're an adult who is going to be competing at a professional level in sports, they are probably physically about the same as a cisgender woman because they never even went through that puberty in the first place. So that is a person, it would not make sense for them to compete against men in that case. Now, if you want sports to be fully and completely fair, this is another thing I talked about in my Matt Walsh video. When it comes to sports, you got to look at what you value most because there is no situation where you're going to have a perfectly fair and equitable game. Like, look at Michael Phelps, right? He's got this abnormally long wingspan. Should he be only competing against fish? No, that doesn't make any sense. He has a biological advantage against other cisgender men in swimming. Similarly, if you're looking at men's basketball, for example, a man who is 5'6", who's my height, you get a 5'6" man or you get a 6'8" man, one of them is going to have a physical advantage over the other. So if you care at the end of the day about sports being fair and equal, and that is your top priority, then sports would all be separated by height class, weight class, and in addition to that, they would all also be separated by a variety of other factors that most influences that particular sport. That is not practical, because now you have sports where every single league has a million divisions. Financially, that's not practical. So, do we want sports to be practical, or do we want them to be idealistic? If we're looking practically, generally separating sports into an overall category for men and an overall category for women has roughly taken the majority of those, like, because on average men are taller than women, on average men are larger than women. That's not true across the board, but that's true on average, right? So on average, separating sports by gender has for the most part taken care of leveling the playing field as much as possible without it being completely perfect. Now, the fact that somebody is born with one set of genitals, right, and then later transition to being a different gender, again, how that's going to affect their performance in that sport varies on the specific path that that person took to transition, and because of that, the way that it's going to factor into that sport really needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis, and because this happens so infrequently, there's no reason that we can't. Again, highly recommend Samantha Lux's video on this. She breaks it down beautifully. Her video is all facts and no opinions, like she pretty much lays it all out on the table. So definitely check out that video if you want more information on that. Once again, proving that it's not all about kids, Dad Challenge Podcast posted a picture of a Budweiser can that said R.I.P. Budweiser, and what it was a Budweiser can showing rainbows on it, basically saying LGBTQ pride. Beer is not for kids, Josh. I don't know if you know this. In the US, you have to be 21 in order to buy beer. So this beer is not being marketed towards kids. So once again, this has nothing to do with you having an issue with this because of kids. This is you having an issue with it because you have an issue with the LGBTQ community in general. Otherwise, why does the marketing of beer bother you? No kids are involved in beer whatsoever. How does a beer marketing bother you if it's not about kids, or if it is about kids and not about just having something against LGBTQ people in general? Answer me that. So now here we get to my girl Fight Mage Studio, who has been, her name's Pepper, and she's been talking with Dad Challenge on Twitter, in the Twitter threads, and having a very nice and civil conversation with him, and here's how that conversation's been going. So Pepper said, "Sir, I think you're giving the wrong impression by calling it an ideology. Being trans is a form of human experience, like being gay, right-handed, straight, or dyslexic. When a child tells you they're sad, you listen, right? And when they tell you they're sad all the time?" So she brings up a good point. Josh replies by saying, "It is an ideology. It's also a modern day religion. It has flags and books and events like kids' drag camps. I know this might not be what you want to hear, but if you have to teach this to young kids, it's an ideology." And she says, "I mean this completely seriously. Do you understand that there's a difference between doing drag and being trans? And can you tell me what the difference is? Because they are different things, as we've established in this video already." Now, something having flags and books does not make it a religion. I'm confused, like, there's an American flag. Is America a religion? I have a Chicago flag somewhere. Is Chicago a religion? No, it's a city, but we're not going to talk about Josh's opinions on Chicago. Every time he says something about Chicago, it's nasty, so we're not even going to go into that. But is Chicago a religion? No, it's a geographical location, right? Something having a flag. I have a book about Polish Chicago, and I have a flag of Poland, and I have a flag of Chicago. Does that mean me being Chicago Polish is a religion? I mean, the fact that Chicago Polish is usually Catholic, I mean, the Catholic part's a religion, but I haven't been Catholic in a long time. So, no, my point is that it's not a religion. Something having books, flags, that's, what? Where does that even come from? All right, let's continue. So, regarding drag, Josh then replies, "Of course there's a difference, but they all carry the same goal: indoctrinate children. If there were a genetic marker for trans people, we would have a different convo. You cannot choose to have a mental illness either, but we don't affirm any others like we do trans." I'll get into the whole dysmorphia versus dysphoria thing in a second, because I don't think Josh understands the difference, and I get it because it's hard for a lot of people to understand the difference, but there's a very clear difference in how it's treated, so I'm going to explain that in a second. But when it comes to the whole there is no genetic marker for it, that's not fully known. I just want to be clear about that. Humans and human evolution is extremely complex. The way that animals evolve and the ways that we adapt to have certain traits for our environments, the whole evolutionary procedure is complicated, okay? I saw this great meme about evolution. It says, "It started out with a fish. How did it end up like this? It was only a fish." That's not to say that our ancestors are literally fish, okay? But that's to say that, over time, animals have common ancestors and we evolve over time to have a certain set of traits. Sometimes I think it's kind of funny that most humans have hair on their heads, but not most other parts of their bodies. Some people are bald on their head, but have hair on their back. There's such a random set of traits. There's so much variation among humans. What causes every single bit of it? Some of it's known and some of it isn't. Some things like having blue eyes or brown eyes, how that happens, how those dominant and recessive traits come into being, those things have been discovered and people are learning more about those things, but we have some genetic markers for those things now. Remember back in the 90s and 2000s, there was this whole debate about, is there a gay gene? Is being gay a choice? Are you born this way? Is there a specific gene that causes it? At the end of the day, a lot of things about what makes humans uniquely the way we are and what causes us to experience certain things or to have certain traits, not every single thing is fully known beyond a reasonable doubt. That's why these things are still being discovered. It's really weird to talk about experiences of being human as if the science is done. No more science. We've discovered all there is to discover. Imagine if people thought that way before we discovered gravity and stuff like that. If they were just like, nope, we've observed the world the way it is. There's nothing more. There's nothing beyond this. That's a really weird way to look at it. Is there a genetic marker for being trans? I don't know. I am not a scientist, Josh is not a scientist, and I think the majority of medical professionals are still trying to discuss what causes certain things to happen among humans and what are the best ways to go about those things. That is an ongoing discussion. So to say definitively there is no genetic marker for it, you don't have proof of that. Anyway, my girl Pepper is over here being a hero on Twitter saying being trans isn't a mental illness, it's just a different way of being. Gender dysphoria is a mental illness. Typically the best option is transitioning. People aren't their genes, we're more than that. We're fighting for acceptance, we're fighting so we don't have to be afraid to use the bathroom anymore, we're fighting so we don't have to be afraid on a blind date, we're fighting so we can sit in the grass and enjoy a summer day. I wasn't indoctrinated into being trans, which is an important thing to say too. Because Josh keeps going on like this is something kids are indoctrinated into. There are lots of trans adults who did not have accepting families. They are still trans. And in fact, when I reviewed Dave Rubin's book, Don't Burn This Book, that book, when I reviewed that, I even pulled up some statistics to show how a lot of people who detransition, the overwhelming majority of detransitioners eventually return to transitioning again. The majority of them stopped their transition because their family wasn't supportive, because they were experiencing too much of the outside world ostracizing them for it, because in a lot of cases maybe they were on their parents' health insurance and their parents refused to cover hormone treatments for them, so they had to stop doing them until they were financially in a situation where they could handle that themselves. The majority returned to it afterwards because being trans was something inherent to who they were, and even if they stopped that and kind of went back into the closet for the meantime, it's kind of like when people talk about conversion therapy and they're like, oh, I used to be gay or bisexual or whatever, but now I'm not anymore. A lot of those people are later found out to absolutely still have those feelings and just be repressing them. I in fact talk about this a lot when it comes to bisexual people, because a lot of times people might look at that as a success story because you were capable of being attracted to another gender the whole time, which is really disgusting that people would look at that as a success story. But it does happen. It does happen where people will go to, a conversion therapy type of thing. They were bisexual the whole time, so they end up with someone of a different gender, and their family says, wow, look, they're not gay anymore. That's not how this works, okay? That's not how this works. And when it comes to the indoctrination thing, like I've said, I've grown up seeing straight people all the time. Kids grow up seeing male-female romances in movies, seeing cisgender people conceiving and birthing children, not literally, not like actually seeing the act of it, but seeing shows on TV where someone might be pregnant, seeing someone talk about their mom being pregnant with them. Kids see straight and cisgender things throughout their childhood all the time. That does not indoctrinate them into that.
Oh, I am just coming out myself. I am coming out hetero.
I grew up watching Disney princesses kiss the prince and I still like women. It's not because someone indoctrinated me with that as a kid. In fact, a lot of times when you're a kid and you don't have any access to this information at all, and you start to experience these things, you grow up feeling like maybe there's something wrong with you and you were really scared to talk about it because you don't see anyone else talking about it, and you start to worry if maybe like there's something that you personally are doing wrong. It does a lot of damage to kids' mental health, and it's, we know why that's bad, right? Let's continue. So Josh continues and says, if you are not having a conversation with your children on the trans issue, Then they will not be prepared when the ideologues, teachers, push it on them. You need to have the conversation early and often so that your kids are who they are. They are not born in the wrong body. It's like the stranger danger conversation. Help your kids understand their value and worth. Make sure they are affirmed and loved by you so much so that when someone brings this up to them, they see the danger in it. Teach them to push back when a purple-haired, septum-pierced teacher tries to push it on them. Teach them to counter with love and understanding, but also with boldness. This is the only way. I really don't want someone coming back at me with Godwin's Law, but my dude, when you start with the trans question, rather issue, and then you follow it up with that, you know what that sounds like, right, Josh? Anyway, let's continue. Your kids are who they are. They are not born in the wrong body. Okay, you don't know everybody's kids, Josh. I will say right now, right here, the overwhelming majority of people are not trans. Trans people are an extreme minority, but they do exist, okay? Let's continue. I don't understand why it's about the purple-haired septum-pierced teacher. I mean, I have a nose piercing. I bleach my hair. None of what I look like is natural. I have 17 tattoos and I've had plastic surgery, so I guess I'm not fit to be a teacher, despite the fact that I used to be an English teacher and I was quite a great English teacher for children learning literature. But whatever, the fact that Josh maybe thinks that I might look too alternative, or the fact that I am not in the closet about my sexual orientation, all of that means I'm not fit to teach. Glad we understand.
And those that can't teach gym.
Someone replied and said, and God help you if your kid was trans, then they might actually hurt themselves after you get done talking to them. So someone's basically saying to Josh, like, hey, you're basically out here saying, no, your kids are definitely not trans. There's no chance of it. Like, Josh, what if one of your kids ends up being trans? Because Josh himself has 4 kids. He's very into being a dad, which I think is wonderful. I think it's wonderful to take pride in being a dad and to care a lot about your kids. And I think he does have genuine love for his kids. I truly feel that he does. So someone asked him, like, okay, it's not likely. In fact, it's highly unlikely that one of your kids is going to be trans because, once again, it's a very small percentage of the population. But what if? What if one of your kids later comes out as trans? Josh replies to that with, they aren't, nor would they ever be, because I have these conversations with them. Wait, hold on. You're saying your kids never could be trans because you have these conversations with them. Are you admitting that you're indoctrinating your kids? You're out here claiming that other people are telling kids they have to be one way, but you have these conversations with them. What do you mean these conversations? If you're saying you know for a fact your kids won't be trans because of the conversations you have with them, you are admitting to being the one to indoctrinate them. You are admitting that you are the one that is telling them how they have to be. That's ridiculous. Someone says, it's giving my child will not be left-handed. Oh, we'll get into that, don't worry. Then Josh replies with, tell me it's not a contagion brought on with social media. The data doesn't lie. And then he has a picture of U.S. adults. It says 7% of U.S. adults now identify as LGBT. That's not surprising. That's about what I assumed it would be. And then he shows that people born before 1946 are the smallest percentage. People born after that are the second smallest, right? Each generation, the older the generations get, the fewer LGBTQ people are in them. There's a couple of reasons for this, okay? And let's keep in mind a certain logical fallacy we've talked about a lot on this channel. In Latin, we call it post hoc ergo propter hoc. I don't speak Latin, I'm just pretentious. That translates to after this, therefore because of this. Basically, it's the correlation does not equal causation fallacy. Just because something happened along with something or something happened after something does not mean that one thing caused the other. In fact, the other thing could have been caused the other way around, or those things could be unrelated but just coincidentally happening at the same time, or there could be an external factor causing both of these things, right? So it's like, for example, it's like if I said, I fucked all your moms, therefore I am your dad. That's not how that works. That's not logical. I did fuck all your moms, though. Anyway, let's talk about some of the reasons why younger generations may be more likely to identify as LGBTQ rather than older generations. Is it because younger generations are being indoctrinated into the LGBTQ cult? Well, that's one theory, but I have a few others that I think are just as likely, if not more likely. One thing about the LGBTQ population, I think a lot of people forget this. Josh, do you know what AIDS is? Are you aware of AIDS? Are you aware of that? Back in the 80s and early 90s, there was a disease called AIDS that was a huge epidemic. You may have not heard of it because a lot of people tried to sweep it under the rug. You may have not heard of it was sarcastic, by the way. I'm going off. You guys get it. A lot of people in the 80s, like Ronald Reagan, tried to sweep it under the rug. Shout out to my American Girl doll, Courtney, whose book talks about how Ronald Reagan did nothing to help the AIDS crisis. Anyway, there were a significant portion of LGBTQ people lost to the AIDS epidemic. That includes a high percentage of gay men who were the largest target of being infected with and eventually dying of HIV and AIDS. That would be the largest part of that. But as we know, gay men are only one part of the entire LGBTQ demographic. And as such, they were also not the only people who were infected with AIDS. In addition to that, bisexual men were infected with AIDS and a lot of them passed away as well. In addition to that, bisexual women, a lot of them as well. In addition to that, transgender women. My whole point here is a lot of LGBTQ people were susceptible to that back then. And I just want to be clear about this as well. I'm not saying that HIV and AIDS was something that only affected LGBTQ people, because it affected a lot of people. It affected a lot of straight people as well. It had to do with being sexually transmitted, but on top of that, it also had to do with people transmitting it through drugs and blood transfusions and things like that. It's a huge problem throughout the world, right? But there was a disproportionate effect on LGBTQ communities, which is a large reason that governments ignored it at the time, because they didn't really see the need of prioritizing something that was primarily happening to a group of people that they didn't really like anyway. So that's one reason. That's just one that's one factor. Josh, you may be surprised by this, but I don't think just one thing caused this. I think that there's a lot of factors into play about why certain generations have more LGBTQ people than other ones and why that trends upwards over time. Second reason. Is it possible that a lot of people are just not out of the closet about it? Keep this in mind. Remember I mentioned bisexuals and conversion therapy before. I have a significant number of people slide into my DMs every day to come out to me as bisexual. I have a lot of people that do that. And I appreciate that. I'm honored that people trust me with that. But there's a lot of people who say, I am bisexual. I am married to someone of a different gender than me, and I am afraid to talk about this. A lot of people in younger generations are, one, not married yet, so they're out about everything publicly, and two, have grown up in a time where gay marriage has been legal, where there has been an overall cultural movement towards LGBTQ acceptance, so a lot of them feel comfortable coming out. Now I know a lot of people who are not hiding their sexuality behind a different gender partner and staying in the closet about it, right? So that's one example. There are a lot of people who are still closeted. And then finally, just the overall cultural acceptance of it has made a lot of people feel more comfortable coming out and coming forward about these things. So my point is there are a lot of factors that could influence this. It's not necessarily that it is a social contagion, whatever that means. So then as Josh continues talking about how none of his kids will ever be trans because he had a conversation with them, because I guess being trans is if your parents tell you not to, you won't do it. Anyway, Pepper responds and says, so what if they keep coming to you? What if a child keeps going to their parent and saying, I feel horrible as a boy, or I'm not a boy for years? At what point do you admit, well, maybe they're trans? Josh says, they won't, because I have a bond with my children. I check in with them every day. I have these conversations with them. Social media and video games don't raise them. They are well adjusted and kept safe. Once again, this argument relies on Josh thinking that in order for a kid to be trans, that someone has to tell them about it, that they have to hear about it through a video game or social media. That's not how it works. Once again, I knew I was bisexual from the time I was 9 years old. I didn't come out till I was 24. I didn't have a lot of words to put to it at the time, and I was in deep denial about it for a while because there wasn't a lot of media out there that represented that. So in my case, it was me just being very confused and feeling like maybe there was something wrong with me. That's all it was. That's how trans kids in this situation are going to feel if they don't get to see other trans people existing. It's not that trans people existing is going to make them trans, it's going to make them know that they're not alone. I talked about this when I reviewed the American Girl Body Image book as well. Someone was saying that the book acknowledging the existence of trans people was going to groom our kids into being trans. There's also a page about disabilities. Is that grooming our kids into being disabled? No, that doesn't make any sense. Here's an example. When I was a little kid, I thought having glasses was super cool. I had friends who had glasses. I had cool teachers who had glasses. I saw people wearing glasses. I thought glasses were the most stylish shit in the world. I didn't need glasses until I was in high school. But when I was younger, I thought having glasses was the coolest thing ever. I didn't need glasses, so I didn't wear glasses. Meanwhile, there were kids who actually needed glasses, so they still wore them. Now, let's say there's a kid who actually needs glasses and also thinks having glasses is cool because they see cool people wearing them. Does that mean that kid was indoctrinated into needing glasses? No. It means that that kid actually needed glasses and also thought they were cool. Meanwhile, I'm someone who could be a glasses ally at the time. I saw people with glasses and thought they were cool, but I at the time didn't need them. It's like that. There are kids who are going to see people who are LGBTQ and feel like they are not alone and feel comfortable about that. And then there are people who are going to see that and say, hey, being LGBTQ is cool. I like that. That's cool. It's not who I am because I don't feel that way. But I do accept it as something that's cool, and I can support my friends who are going through that. right? That's what it is. It's okay. Let's continue. I can't find the tweet right now, but there's a tweet that Josh also put up around this time where he compared it to how we don't affirm people who have EDs. ED in this situation means having an unhealthy relationship with food, not when your dick doesn't work. Always got to make that disclaimer because I don't want to get demonetized. Anyway, well, they say like, okay, let's say a kid has an ED and says that they think that they're really fat and they want to lose weight. Would we allow that kid to keep losing weight because we're affirming their delusions about themselves? And because that is a common point that I see being brought up about this topic, I want to really quickly explain the difference between having dysmorphia and dysphoria, because I actually have had both. And I'm going to go more in depth into this when I do my book review on Bethany's The Twitter Karen's book next week. I'm going to go more in depth on that, but just as a quick overview on the difference there. A lot of people who suffer from EDs have body dysmorphia. What that is a condition where you cannot accurately see your body. You look at yourself and you're something between the way your brain is interpreting you and the way your eyes are visually taking in the visual input of who you are. There's a disconnect somewhere. You could look at yourself. It's not just with weight. There's a lot of other things too. Like someone might look and see that they think their ears are really huge, or they might think their head's too small. Like all these kind of things that just aren't real. Having body dysmorphia is actually really terrifying because to an extent you can't trust your own senses, and that's really scary. To be in a place where you're receiving visual input about yourself, but your brain is not interpreting it correctly and you don't know when you can and can't trust it. A lot of people with EDs specifically have a type of body dysmorphia that makes them see themselves as having a different type of body than they do. And not in all cases it's someone thinking that they're bigger than they are. Sometimes it's people thinking they're smaller than they are or thinking they're weaker than they are. There's a variety of different types. But if we're talking about one of the most common ones, right, it's a lot of people who see themselves as being large, having a higher percentage of body fat than they think that they do, and wanting to be thin. Those people then will often eat too little, adopt unhealthy relationships with food, things like that. And a lot of people say, okay, well, we wouldn't affirm that. We wouldn't say, you're right, if you identify as fat, you must actually be fat, even though you're very clearly thin. So you should be allowed to eat less. Like, we wouldn't do that. That's because that is not dysphoria, that is dysmorphia. When you have dysmorphia, you cannot correctly visualize yourself. That person is not receiving the input correctly. We don't affirm that because there is no actual positive outcome to allowing that person to starve themselves, because if they starve themselves, they're never going to see themselves accurately because the disorder makes you incapable of seeing yourself accurately. So there is never going to be a point you get to where you are now comfortable and feeling that you're thin enough. It's not going to happen because your brain is lying to you, basically. When you are trans, that is dysphoria. That is different. What dysphoria is, you are able to accurately see yourself, but you know that the way that you are, which you are viewing accurately, you know that the way that you are is not the way that you want to be. You are deeply unhappy and uncomfortable with the way that you are, but you are aware that that is how you are. So for example, a trans woman may look in the mirror and see that she has a penis. She will know that she has a penis. She's not incapable of perceiving herself. She's not saying, oh, I don't even see a penis there. If this were body dysmorphia, sure, maybe she doesn't see a penis there. But no, when you have dysphoria, she sees that she has a penis, but she knows that she doesn't want it there because it is causing great distress. That is dysphoria. When it's dysphoria, you already accurately see yourself and you know which changes you want to make. And when you make those changes, you now feel correct because you are capable of viewing yourself accurately. I have had dysphoria as well. I was not gender dysphoria, as I am not trans. However, I had chest dysphoria. As you guys know, I've talked about this on my channel before. I've had breast reduction surgery. My chest was really, really large for a really long time. And I knew how large it was. I was not viewing myself inaccurately because I would see myself and I would say, my tits are huge, because they were. That was accurate. And then when they were made smaller, I said, they're not huge anymore. And then I felt fine. Now I'm happy. When it came to back when I used to have an ED, back then, when I would see myself getting thinner and thinner and thinner, I still would not be able to process that I was thin. I didn't know that because I couldn't accurately view myself, and so I would continue to get thinner, right? See how that's different? It has to do with the way your brain is actually processing it. They are different conditions. They are different things happening. When people say, okay, gender dysphoria is a mental illness, if someone says that, what do you want me to do? Let's say for the sake of the argument that it is, then what? Regardless of what type of condition you want to classify it as, the treatment for it is still to allow people to transition. That has been found over and over again that there is no mental health treatment that can take someone out of being trans. The same way that there is no mental health treatment that can make someone not gay, or that can make someone behave or have the certain type of interests that you want them to. People are the way that they are, and there is no way to change their brain, because if you're going to change that, you're going to change the essence of who they are. Now, when it comes to dysmorphia, that is your body not being able to accurately see yourself, and therefore changing your physical body is not going to fix the root of the problem, because you still won't be able to accurately see yourself. When you have dysphoria, changing your body fixes the root of the problem, because you already can accurately see yourself. You know what you want, you change it, and now you're feeling much better. So I feel like that was an overview. That was a long overview, because now we're getting into Josh's video. Let's take a look at the video that he posted, and we're going to take a look at what he has to say. Since it's a longer video, and this is already an extremely long video, we're going to put it on 1.5 speed.
But apparently we are. So here's the question. If you could choose if your child was trans or not, what would you choose? 4% said they would choose a trans child, which I think they might have got the question confused, and I know maybe I'm skewing it myself, but 96% said no, I would not want a trans child. And so my answer here would be, obviously, no, I wouldn't want a trans child, because the trans-identified people who go through life have a way harder life.
Okay, so context for this, Josh ran a poll on both Twitter and his community tab saying, if you could choose, would you want to have a trans child? And the answers were yes and no. I didn't vote, but I responded to this poll saying that a good parent would choose a neutral third option where whether the child is trans or not makes no difference to them, that they just want the child to be happy regardless. Now that Josh is over here saying like, well, trans people have a harder life due to, you know, social discrimination against them, due to prejudice against trans people, due to transphobia, things like that, and due to often needing more medical procedures, they're going to have a more difficult time. And that is true. That is absolutely true. I completely agree with him on that. But that doesn't really answer the question that the poll's putting out. That's like, okay, let's say you have a poll that says, would you rather have a child who's a genius at math or a genius at literature? If you said you don't care because you only care about the child's happiness, well, that's obviously bullshit, because a genius at math could become a rocket scientist, and rocket scientists make a lot more money than literary professors do. So you're setting your child up for a life of poverty if they follow their passion. Like, do you see how ridiculous that gets when you take it all? Like, at the end of the day, if Josh is asking me if I personally want a trans child, I don't want a trans child, I don't want a cis child, I don't want a straight child, I don't want a gay child, I don't want a white child, I don't want a black child, I don't want a male child, I don't want a female child, I don't want any child. I am child free, I have no children. So I have no way to answer that question because I just don't want a child at all. However, if you are someone who is currently pregnant and is about to have a child, whether that child grows up to be trans or not, I think a lot of parents out there legitimately don't have a preference. They would like to see a world where if their child does happen to be trans, that they aren't going to face a lot of discrimination for that, and maybe that world is going to come in the future. There's bumps along the way, but overall the world tends to get better as things move ahead, so we can hope. All right, let's continue.
That can't be argued. And this is why, because trans-identified individuals are marginalized. We can't argue that. Okay? Yeah. There's a big debate going on right now in the world about it all, and there's like something just happened in New Zealand. This girl named Posey Parker went to talk about women's-based rights, sex-based rights, about how women need their own safe spaces and everything else because of what's going on in the world, and I tend to lean with that. I do.
Okay. I do not personally see Posey Parker, which... Can we have a moment of silence for Parker Posey? Parker Posey, an indie film actress who I quite liked her work, who has done nothing wrong, but just happens to have such a similar name to a extremely mean TERF out there. At first, I was confused and I was like, wait, did my girl Parker Posey go TERF? And then I'm like, oh no, this is just a different woman. This is Posey Parker. I'm still gonna get it confused in my head which way the names go in that case. Anyway, this woman that he's talking about here, I have sent Josh personally, I have sent him an article where this woman says out loud on her show, says out loud into the microphone that she thinks it is a good idea to protect sex-segregated spaces, to make sure that there is a bathroom solely for women with vaginas, that she thinks it's a good idea for men with penises, to go into that space with their guns to enforce that if necessary. This woman specifically said that she thinks it is a good idea, that she thinks it is dangerous for someone with a penis to be in the women's bathroom. That's where she's starting with this. So one of her proposed solutions to that is to have people guard the bathroom, people with penises guarding the bathroom with weapons. She thinks it's going to make women feel safer. Like, if she's operating from a position of thinking that there shouldn't be penises in the women's bathroom, so her solution is to put more penises in the women's bathroom, but specific people with penises who are going to intentionally try to start fights and instigate stuff. This woman has called for violence against women in that sense. Because, let me be clear about something. There are people out there who say that they can tell what someone's genitals are by looking at them. They cannot. We saw the whole thing with Daniel Radcliffe's girlfriend recently. Remember that? Daniel Radcliffe, his girlfriend just got pregnant. There were people out there claiming that they thought Daniel Radcliffe's girlfriend was trans because she's taller than him, because he's just a shorter guy. But she's not. She's pregnant. She's a cisgender woman. So it was just this whole like completely made up thing about that. So my whole point here is, even if Posey Parker does not consider trans women to be real women, her proposed solutions, based on her own understanding of the world, would harm the group of people that she considers women. Now, I consider trans women to be real women. So regardless, everything she's saying is harming at least that demographic of women. Oh, Josh, I just realized you have a Back to the Future poster. I have a Back to the Future tattoo. I've got a little DeLorean with a quote from the movie on it. That's something we have in common. Anyway, let's go on.
I believe that women, especially in sports, are being eliminated from sports when they're competing against men. And I know people are going to be like, Josh, you're a transphobe. And at this juncture, if you think the idea that biological men should not compete against biological women is transphobic, then I guess I'm transphobic. I guess I'll just have to live with that, because I honestly believe as a guy, especially as a dad of a daughter, that there is a big thing that is going on and people are like, it's not happening. It absolutely is happening, okay?
Okay, so when he's talking about sports, again, take a look at Samantha Lux's video I posted below. That needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis. When he says biological men, I don't know what he means by that. If he's talking about the penis, unless you play the sport with your genitals, then it doesn't matter. Otherwise, what? Let's say that there's someone who's born intersex who has an enlarged clitoris that could legally be classified as a micro penis or whatever. Should that person not be allowed to play women's sports if they are also capable of giving birth? Like, at what point do you specifically draw the line? Now, as it's very clear, intersex people are a small percentage of the population, trans people are a small percentage of the population, the majority of the world is cisgender people, which is why, because this happens at elite levels in sports so infrequently, we need to take this on a case-by-case basis depending on when that person transitioned, how far along they are in it. I believe a lot of athletics organizations right now have a rule that if you were assigned male at birth, that you have to have been on estrogen for at least like a year or 2 years or something before you're allowed to compete in women's leagues. And once again, check out the video by Samantha Lux, where she has a ton of sources to show how having started a physical transition and going through that process puts you on par with the athletic league that you want to play in. On top of that, there's a viral picture that's gone around of a wrestling match where someone's like, see, this is what the trans people want, and it's a picture of a male wrestler absolutely dominating a female wrestler. What people aren't realizing is that that wrestler is a transgender male. That person was born, assigned female at birth, transitioned to being male, took testosterone, blocked estrogen, that person transitioned to being a man. And because of that, because there was a rule that you have to compete in the sport that aligns with your genitals and aligns with your original birth certificate, that person who is now male was able to completely dominate a woman in that sport, and it became unfair for women. So it's not necessarily going to be fair for the majority of women necessarily by segregating people solely based on the sex they are at birth, right? That's not necessarily how you're going to make sports equal. There's a lot of variation among humans. Again, this is something we need to look at more in depth when the situation arises. And in the majority of cases, trans women playing women's sports or trans men playing men's sports is not a problem. It really isn't. Let's continue.
And again, you'll see this question. People will call me a transphobe for just asking this question because I've got you stuck in a conundrum. But the answer here is, and I'll come back to the...
I'm not calling you a transphobe for asking this question. I'm calling you a transphobe for calling being trans a social contagion and claiming that people are indoctrinated into it and saying that there's no way your kids could ever possibly be trans because you've talked to them and love them and what. I'm calling you transphobic for those reasons. You asking this question on a poll, I don't think is what makes you transphobic. You refusing to listen when people are explaining to you the realities of this situation, that's what makes you transphobic.
The conundrum. But the answer here is everybody should say no. Just based on the fact that if we could choose, even though we can't, but if you could, would you not choose the easiest path for your child?
If you had an answer in mind, why did you even ask people this question? So you're like, I asked people this question, but obviously they were all lying in the answer. Why did you even ask it then? Did you not genuinely want to hear people's real feedback on this? Because now you're telling people that their answers aren't real, so why did you even ask?
Everybody would say that, but this is when it comes down to like, what would make your child's life a little easier? Would you choose that path for your child? You can't, but would you? And so many people couldn't answer the question. It's not that they couldn't, they wouldn't, because the connotation... Or
maybe they couldn't. Why are you so intent on reading into people's words like this? Like, people are telling you, you're asking people a question and they're answering honestly, and then you're trying to skew their answer to fit your agenda. I genuinely, if I were someone who wanted to have kids, I would be neutral on that because I want my kid to be happy. The same way, do you, Savvy, do you want your kid to be born female or male? Most people have the answer, I don't care as long as it's healthy. You know, people ask that all the time, like when you're getting your ultrasound. Oh, do you want a boy or a girl? I don't care as long as the child's healthy. People say that all the time. If your child is born female, they're gonna have more struggles in life due to misogyny and due to reproductive health rights being taken away. And so should we all just hope that our child is born male for that reason because they're gonna have an easier path? No, most parents just want their child to be whoever that child is going to be. These people are not lying to you.
And right now, to answer that question, if you answered it honestly, would be that you would be transphobic, and nobody wants to be labeled that, except I don't give a shit anymore. All these phobic comments, homophobic, transphobic, freaking xenophobic, all of it has lost its power. It literally means nothing to anybody anymore. Some people...
I agree that some people will label people as prejudiced when they haven't really done anything to deserve that, or when they genuinely are just uneducated and are seeking answers. And that's why, like I said, I am always open to having these discussions. But when you refuse to listen to people and when you double down on your viewpoint about this, people are trying to go out of their way to explain to you how this really works, then in those cases, that's what makes someone transphobic. It's not having a lack of education about this and having the wrong opinion when you started or whatever. That's not what it's about. I've had a lot of wrong opinions that I've had to change my mind about over the years. Like I said, I was originally, I was Catholic. I'm not Catholic anymore. Back when I was in college, I used to be a hard capitalist. I've told you guys that before too. I don't believe that capitalism is a perfect system at all anymore, as I'm sure you guys know at this point. My point is, as we gain more education about the world and the way things work, we often change our opinions. Most of us aren't born knowing anything about the world, and we pick up things based on what we learn around us. Josh, I'm not blaming you for not understanding the LGBTQ experience. I'm blaming you for refusing to listen and continuing to double down on saying, no, all the things you've presented to me can't be true. It's a social contagion because I said it is. Like, that's what's transphobic about you, not asking someone a question. When I say you're transphobic, it's not because the word has lost its power and it doesn't mean anything. I am telling you straight up what I mean to you when I say that.
People even in the rights, like if you look at someone like Matt Walsh or people from Daily Wire and all those guys over there, if you call them transphobes, they actually take it as a cloak of pride at this point.
Yeah, because they never would have not taken that as a cloak of pride. Matt Walsh explicitly says that he wants people to stop being trans. I showed this in my last video about Dad Challenge podcast. Matt Walsh has said he doesn't want adults to even be able to transition. He doesn't want anybody to transition. Matt Walsh's ideal world is one where there are feminine women with vaginas and masculine men with penises, and those men impregnate those women and we all have children. He has made this extremely clear, okay? He has. So obviously Matt Walsh doesn't care about being called transphobic because he sees that as a positive thing. It has nothing to do with the word not meaning anything. He knows what it means, and he actively wants to be that way. It's kind of like back in the day, someone asked John Wayne, are you a white supremacist? And John Wayne was like, well, I do think white people are more civilized, so in that sense, yeah, I'm a white supremacist. That doesn't mean white supremacist has lost its meaning. There are people who take pride in being these things that other people deem to be negative. There are people in this world who don't actually want equality for all humans. Matt Walsh is one of them. All right, let's continue.
Right, I think it was Matt Walsh who got like Transphobe of the Year by some magazine or by something like that. And he's like, wears it's a trophy that he wears proudly. The people who use these monikers and say, oh, how dare you say anything, you're transphobic, you've lost all power in saying anything anymore. You call people
That's not losing power. Matt Walsh wants to be transphobic. That is intentional. Okay, anyway.
Nazis when they're not. You call people, misogynist when they're not. You've lost all power because it doesn't hold any value anymore to say that to somebody. No one gives a shit if they're...
Okay, well, Josh, if you don't want... You might not want to phrase things as the trans question if you don't... Never mind.
Call that. And that's just basically what happened here, and I knew it was going to happen. That's why I did it, because I definitely want to tie this into the Jonathan Chronology thing, okay? So again, let's come back to the...
Okay, so he's going to eventually tie this into a family vlogger whose child may be trans, and they're putting it on blast. I'm going to agree with Josh on the fact that this family should not be documenting that and putting it on a family vlog. Like I've said in the past, I agree with Josh's mission about ending family vlogs 110%. I think that kids should not be used as content, parents should not be profiting off of their kids should not be the breadwinners for their families. That is not a child's job. I am against child labor. I do not think family vlogs should exist, and I do not think parents should be putting their kids in the spotlight. Josh, we can agree on that 100%. So this is the Sacon Jolie family. I've heard about them a little bit. I agree with you. I think they're absolute trash. I do not think that they should be putting their kid on... I don't even know that much about them. And I will say, whether or not their kid is trans, they should not be putting that kid on the internet for money. Completely agree with you on that. So I don't know how much we'll disagree with there. But if you think that the kid being trans is the problem, or the kid questioning if they're trans is the problem, that's a little different.
Conundrum. The conundrum to answer this question honestly is that if you say, no, I wouldn't want a trans child, then you would be labeled a transphobe, because some people do care, I guess, about being labeled transphobes. Because they want to say that they're so welcoming and accepting of everybody and everything, and maybe they really are. But to answer this question honestly, you'd have to look inward and say, damn it, if I wouldn't want a trans child, that means I'm transphobic. And
Wait, why are you saying to answer it honestly? Are you not believing that there are parents who honestly are equally okay with their kids being trans or not? Or that equally would want that or not? Like, you honestly don't think that... I think people answered your poll honestly and you just didn't like the answers.
And let me tell you this, you're not. It does not make you transphobic to not want your child to suffer through an existence that is very hard.
Okay, I get what he's saying here. I don't want to misrepresent what Josh is saying. I don't think that he's saying that parents should not want their kids to be trans because they hate trans people. I think he's saying that the reason he doesn't want his kids to be trans is because being trans is a harder life for them, and he doesn't want to have to see someone he loves go through prejudice, have to go through discrimination, have to go through the mental health struggles that often come with it, and that also have to go through... We know all the ways trans people are discriminated against. Josh is in fact perpetuating many of them himself right here. So I can agree that many parents want their kids to have the easiest path forward. But again, there are plenty of parents out there who would be equally happy either way. Like, for example, if your child is born male, your child is probably going to have an advantage in the world. If your child is born white, your child is probably going to have an advantage in the world. Let's say you have a couple where one parent is black and one parent is white. You don't necessarily know... I mean, the kid's going to come out mixed race regardless, but there are places in the world where this idea of like colorism exists, and people will discriminate against people with darker skin, even if the people with lighter skin are also not white themselves, right? There's a discrimination that happens there as well. So that's like saying, okay, if you're a mixed race couple, would you want your kid to come out with darker skin or lighter skin? You wouldn't even ask that question because, once again, the parents want their kids to be happy and healthy, even if socially there is a chance that the kid will face greater discrimination for one outcome rather than another. You still just want your kid to be who they are. Yeah, I can agree that they're not going to want their kid to face more struggles, but I think a lot of parents who are supportive of their kids are going to view this as, this is a challenge for me to help make the world more welcoming to my kid and to stand up for my kid, rather than to hope that my child turns out in a way that conforms to what the world wants. It's a different worldview, okay?
And that's the right answer. And if those people who say, yes, I would
That's the right... Why did you run a poll if you had a right answer in mind?
want a trans child, there's something deeper going on there. If you go to my Twitter one, 23% said, yes, I want a trans child.
Josh, the problem was that you gave people two options. You gave people two options on a thing that should have been... There should have been a third option that was literally, I am completely neutral about this.
That's where we're going to land today, okay? If you want a trans child, why? Right? And something that's...
Well, I don't want any child, but when it comes to... Well, he says if you want a trans child, why? If you don't want a trans child, why? Like, there's a lot of people who probably answered this question just thinking that that was the answer to say for, yeah, oh, if my kid was trans, I would be equally happy. Like, the way you phrased the poll was misleading, and like, let's just move away from the poll. We get why the poll didn't make any sense. Let's move away. Let's move into the rest of this.
Answers I got on this poll, and I wouldn't go through them all, because there's like 315 answers, by the way, okay? Of the 315, there are at least 3 in there that were really eye-opening. One said, I'm gay, my parents were gay. When I came up to them, my parents were super upset. They were disappointed because they realized the life that they went through and they didn't want me to suffer through that same life. That person can't be transphobic or homophobic because they're gay, right? But if...
Well, I agree that that person is probably not homophobic. I agree that that person probably just did want their kid's life to be better, but I think to say that you can't be homophobic if you're gay is not true. I think just because you're a part of a certain demographic doesn't mean you can't perpetuate harm against your own demographic. People do it all the time. Here's an example. Back in the beginning of the 20th century, there were a lot of women who didn't believe women should have the right to vote. Does that mean because they're women they can't be misogynistic? No, they were actively working against the best interest for women, even though they themselves were women. Okay? There were women who didn't want other women to have the right to vote. There's an example. So just because you're part of a certain demographic doesn't mean you can't do harm to your own demographic. You absolutely can. Okay? Let's continue.
If I said the same thing, it makes me transphobic. How does that make any sense to you? The other one says, I'm trans, and I would not want my kid to be trans. Right? They're not transphobic for saying that, so why am I? A lot of people were honest.
I'm not saying that Josh is transphobic because he doesn't want his kid to have to go through a lot of struggles. I'm saying that Josh is transphobic because he thinks because he has these conversations with his kids, it means his kids can never turn out trans. I think he's transphobic because he's choosing to spread misinformation at this point rather than listen to people who are giving him correct information.
So I would not wish my child to have a more difficult life than me. There were a bunch, right? But the overall majority of people in this were... if you sort by new, because the top comments were voted up that said I wouldn't choose that, and that's because people don't want to answer the question, so they vote up their answer. Or kids should make their own decisions, yes, but that's not the question. The question is, if you could choose, what would you choose? More people avoided the question because, again, I don't think they want to come to terms with what's really in their heart and their mind.
Or maybe they avoided answering the question because you didn't leave an option for the answer that most people actually feel. That's like saying, hey, Savvy, which is your favorite color, red or blue? And I have to choose between one of those. My favorite color is purple. So I would probably just avoid the question. Savvy, that means you're not willing to come to terms with the fact that deep down your favorite color is blue. No, it's purple.
Because they think to say that I don't want a trans kid means that they're trans, it means that they're transphobic, and it doesn't. A lot of people would say I would accept my child for who they are, and that's great. I would too. I think most of you would. Okay, but that's not the question. And so many people deferred to that because they wanted to feel good about themselves.
Or maybe they deferred to it because that was the actual answer and you didn't leave a choice for it. Josh, can we stop trying to read people's minds on this poll that you created and move on to like something real?
Okay, and that's going to tie into this too. Because I'm virtuous, and I want to virtue signal on the fact that I think this trans conversation is really important because so many people use it to virtue signal. And I know that's going to be like, you're transphobic, and I don't care. Okay, because this is where the world is right now. I've said this on many videos in the past. To be a victim in our society today, especially in the Western culture, is to be honored above most. And that's why TikTok's a super toxic place. Because
I will agree that TikTok is a toxic place. I think there's a lot of things wrong with TikTok. TikTok scares me. So does Instagram, though. And I use Instagram. To be fair, I also participate in a lot of systems that I think are bad. Like, I sell romance novels on Amazon, and I think that Amazon is doing net harm to the book-selling community, right? Like, there's a lot of things in this world that we struggle to square things with, okay? I agree, though, that I think that a reliance on social media has not been good for kids' mental health. I agree that I think it's putting a lot of undue stress on kids, and I agree that I think TikTok especially is an extremely manipulative platform because of the way the algorithms work, because of the ways that they're specifically designed to try to give you as high of a dopamine hit as possible, and then to learn the things that you're spending the most time on, and then to tailor the results specific to that, so that you can then continue going through all of these things that you're going to be addicted to. They can make more ad revenue. Meanwhile, your brain gets more and more addicted to the specific dopamine hits you get from looking at specific types of content, which shortens our attention spans. Like, there's a whole thing about, I agree. I think that apps like TikTok are doing harm. I agree. I don't think that that's related at all to trans people, though. Let's continue.
those people with the most victimhood status points are the most celebrated, especially on TikTok and on social media. Like if you go on there and you say you have, I think it's a personality disorder, multiple personality disorder, whatever they call that thing. Those people, if you go read those comments of those people who say, hey, my name's Ted and I'm the gatekeeper of this body. And then they go like this and they're like, hey, my name's Lucy and I'm the cook of us. And you go read those comments, go read them. Okay, it's almost all positive. Oh yes, queen, good for you. Okay.
Have you considered, Josh, that it could be because that person's deleting the negative comments? A lot of people, here's the thing, I don't delete negative comments from my channel. I don't delete comments. That's why Josh has commented on my video when I talked about him in the past. I left it up there. But there are plenty of people. And again, it's your own channel. It's your own space. You can choose if you want to keep comments or delete them. That is up to the individual to decide. But a lot of people do delete comments. So I don't think looking at the comments and people being positive about it necessarily means that that's how everyone views it. I think a lot of those people probably delete the negative comments that they get. When it comes to victimhood being celebrated, I really think that depends what you mean. I think overall, a lot of people just have empathy for other people's struggles. If someone is going through something difficult, other people try to empathize and try to connect with other people based on shared experiences. I don't think that's victimhood being celebrated. And as we can see, there's a lot of examples of people who are different from others, whether that's due to having some type of disability or due to being part of a marginalized identity. Those people just get actively bullied rather than criticized for any wrongdoing. They just get bullied.
To put an end to 100,000 years of being weirded out by gays.
By people like Josh who say, why would you dress like a clown when you're speaking at a political event or something? Who just make fun of their outfit or say that they just are bad looking or something. That's just bullying. So, no, it's not universal celebration. There's also a lot of bullying that goes along with it.
We are celebrating mental illness. Okay, if I were to ask the question, do you think that being transgender is a mental illness? Okay, we all know the answer is gender dysphoria is a mental illness, but you can't say that anymore because it's transphobic. That's why people wouldn't choose this for the children.
The DSM classifies gender dysphoria as a mental illness. Gender dysphoria is part of being transgender, but it is not equivalent to being transgender, right? It's like body dysmorphia is often part of having an ED, but having body dysmorphia and having an ED are also different things, right? We can acknowledge that psychologists classify gender dysphoria as a mental illness. But the treatment for that mental illness has been, the only treatment that has been found to be effective at all for that mental illness, if we're going to classify it that way, is a physical treatment. Keep in mind that our brains are part of our bodies. So when we separate things into mental versus physical illness in the first place, I think that's kind of reductive. We can talk about different categories of what causes something to happen without having to say, oh, these things are purely mental and these things are purely physical, because once again, our brains are physical as well. Our brains are part of our bodies. The dopamine and the serotonin that goes through our brains, those are chemical things that are happening. Those are physical processes. So I don't even think that separating things into this dichotomy of mental versus physical is even helpful in the first place. But if we go beyond that and look at, okay, let's say for the sake of the argument that gender dysphoria is a mental illness, regardless of how it's classified, the treatment that has been found to work for it is allowing people to transition. There is no mental treatment for it because that's not what the root of the problem is. There's people who already see themselves accurately, they see themselves as they are, and they know that they want that to be different. they treat that, and then they're happier. Okay? I don't see what the issue with that is. Being trans is not a mental illness. We can classify gender dysphoria as a mental illness, but let's say there's someone who's gone through dysphoria their whole life and has gotten all the procedures done that they want. Let's say they took hormone replacement therapy, they got top and bottom surgery, they look exactly how they want to, and they're living a life that they want to. A lot of times that person may not be having gender dysphoria anymore. The mental illness component of it is cured. They don't feel gender dysphoria anymore because they're in the body that makes them happy. So no, being trans is not a mental illness. There are trans people out there who have already overcome the dysphoria, who have transitioned and are happily living their lives. So no, being trans is not a mental illness. Being trans is a demographic. Do we understand the difference there?
And again, most people wouldn't. But those who would, and again, where I want to focus this conversation, those on my Twitter profile said 23% of the people who voted. Let me just go there, I'll show you. So here it is. Hypothetical question. 22.9% of 200 votes.
All right, let's look at these Twitter things, because first of all, of those 19 comments, one of them was mine explaining this. And on top of that, I just want to look at this tweet right here. This guy knows what's up, hashtag DeSantis 2024. Josh, being in Canada, you are about as far from Florida as it gets. On top of that, I guess he's saying this about the fact that DeSantis wants to ban TikTok. Like I said, I can agree that TikTok is a net harm on a lot of people's mental health and things like that. However, the whole bill that was coming out about this idea to ban TikTok that for a while was getting a lot of bipartisan support ended up people were sliding in other things about wanting to, get people's data and things. So that ended up being a whole mess, right? Regardless of DeSantis's views on TikTok, do you really think he'd be good for the US, Josh? You really do? With his bans on all, I guess based on what Josh is about to say, he does agree with a lot of DeSantis's desire to ban LGBTQ stuff. So let's continue.
Not that many people, it's not as many as YouTube, say yes to a trans child. What? And the people who voted here, 11,000 votes. This is the reason why the conversation is heating up, because of videos like this. This is a 13-year-old boy dressing in drag while...
That's a 13-year-old girl. That's not a boy, that's a girl. I'm pretty sure that's actually a girl. Also, if you're so worried about this child being exploited, then why are you showing them on your video?
Adult men cheer him on and film him on stage. In New Zealand, Posey Parker went to talk about women's safe spaces, and she might be transphobic, she might be anti-trans, but I think she's pro-woman.
She's not pro-women. I've already explained that. She has stated personally that she thinks armed men should go into women's bathrooms to defend women against trans women. She's actively suggesting there be more violence in women's spaces. She is not pro-woman.
Which makes her anti-trans in the world. This is what happens when a woman goes...
Okay, being pro-woman does not make you anti-trans, okay? Being anti-trans makes you anti-trans. I am pro-woman and pro-trans, all right? No, that's not correct.
When a woman goes to speak about safe spaces for women, most of these people here are men breaking down the barriers, coming after her, trying to literally kill her. Okay?
I don't think they were trying to kill her. Do we have any proof that they were trying to kill her? They broke down a barrier. I'll be clear about something. I am not a fan of violence in general, but I'm not going to judge this situation in particular just because I don't have enough context. When all you see is someone doing something in a vacuum, I don't know what came before or after this. I don't know what specifically these people are reacting to. They don't like Posey Parker and they're trying to get her to leave. I don't see any proof that they were trying to kill her. Again, if someone does try to kill her, I will denounce that because I am not a fan of violence. I don't think it is the answer for anyone of any side of the issue. I don't think violence is the answer. But what I'm seeing here is people breaking through a barrier. Also, there's some men in this crowd. I don't know what you mean that these are all men. Also, some of these people might be trans men, which Posey Parker, by being anti-trans in general, is harming them as well. So if they're trans men who were assigned female at birth, they still face a lot of physical issues that many cis women face, but at the same time are going to be presenting as men and living their lives as men and being men, right? My whole point is you don't know that this is a crowd of straight cisgender men or anything like that. I also see a lot of women in this crowd.
Okay, and if you needed proof that women need safe spaces, they just proved it. Most recently, the conversation is heating up.
That didn't prove to me that I need a safe space. I feel perfectly safe.
UFC fighter, who's, I think, Holly Holmes or something like that, just beat somebody and had a platform.
Something that's on my heart, and I feel like I have the platform to say it, I need to say it. I just feel it's really sad with the sexualization of our children right now. We need to protect them. Whatever that may be, let's protect the children, please. Do anything we can for them.
Protect.
I agree that children should not be sexualized. I don't see what that has to do with trans people at all.
The children, stop sexualizing the children. Now, this is
I agree. We shouldn't sexualize children. I've been very outspoken about children not being sexualized at all, to the point that, like, I'm the person who's out there saying that there's certain movies I won't even watch because I feel like people talk about the show like Euphoria. I won't watch the show Euphoria because of how sexualized the underage characters are. And yes, they're played by adult actors, but it still makes me wildly uncomfortable. Like, things like that. I am very, very against sexualization of children in any way, shape, or form. That is unrelated to LGBTQ topics at all. Like, what he's saying is just complete non sequiturs, but he's putting them next to each other to make us think that they're related.
Conversation that's heating up, and it's the hottest conversation that's ever been. Okay, it's getting crazy. And when I step into this conversation, okay, is when children get involved in this. Now, my stance, as you know it, and I don't care what anybody says, children don't have sexualities. Think that.
What do you mean by that? First of all, I thought we were talking about trans people, which is unrelated to your sexuality. There are trans people who are asexual, right? There are trans people who don't have any sexual attraction to anyone. Being trans doesn't have anything to do. And again, this is when you say sex, are you referring to like sex chromosomes and sex characteristics, or are you referring to like sex as in like attraction and sexual acts and things like that? Like, that's what I'm not clear on, because they're not all the exact same thing, right? Children do not have sexualities. I mean, a lot of people go on dates as teenagers and things like that. Like, if by children you mean like prepubescent children, most don't. I'm also not a child development expert, so I don't feel qualified to speak on this, but children do not have sexualities. If by child you mean anyone under 18, that's just not true. The man that I'm now married to, I started dating when I was 14, so I would say that I had a sexuality at that point, yes. I'm very confused what he's even going, like, what?
The phrase I think someone said online is like, if you have a vegan cat, we all know who's making the decisions. Okay? Children don't have identities outside of who they are as children. I'm sorry. If you have...
So you're saying that children are all just children. Children are not gay, straight, male, female, anything. They're all children. I mean, I'd agree. Like, when I was a kid, I played sports that were boys and girls together and things like that. Because again, before puberty, it's not really much of a difference. Why do we separate children's bathrooms into boys and girls? That's what I don't get.
A 4-year-old who is transgender, we all know who's making the decisions.
Not necessarily. When you say a 4-year-old who's transgender, like, what do you mean by that? Because there are no 4-year-olds who are getting surgery on their genitals. There aren't. It's not happening. Again, I have sources for this in my Matt Walsh video. The youngest case I've ever seen bottom surgery being done is at 17. And if we want to have an argument here about whether it should be at 17 or 18, like, that's a different argument. But when you're saying a 4-year-old, there's no 4-year-old who's getting that surgery. If you're talking about a 4-year-old deciding they want a different name, who cares? Savvy isn't my birth name, but that's the name I've gone by since I was 4. So does that mean that... What? You know, like, if a child wants to go by a different name, if a child wants to dress a certain way, that doesn't mean their parents are making the decision. It means the parents are letting their child have some autonomy and choose what they want to dress in. I didn't like being forced to wear a dress to Catholic church as a child. I didn't like it. So it's okay for my parents to make that decision. I say parents as if I had 2 parents when I was 4. That's funny. Josh is going to use that against me. I know it.
It is not the child. It is not the child. Go to my Twitter poll. The 23% of those people who want that for the children, they actually exist.
Josh, you really need to let up on this poll, because this poll didn't say anything because you skewed the poll by making a false dichotomy out of something that wasn't a dichotomy in the first place. Stop relying on the poll as if it's evidence of anything.
Now, I know Munchausen syndrome by proxy is not the actual term for it, and maybe the DSM-5 needs to be updated with a term like Munchausen syndrome by proxy for...
Yeah, you're right, Josh. The DSM needs to be updated according to your opinion. Where did you get your psychology degree?
Parents who push gender ideology onto their children, because it is actually a thing and it is actually happening. In my church that I worked at, it happened. This guy brought his kid and his 4-year-old girl, and we want you to use her pronouns, her preferred blood, and we're like, this girl is 4. Only way this happens is if that...
I'm sorry, in what way was a parent pushing that on this child? If the child said, I want you to call me this name and call me she, how is that, what's the harm of that? Like, can you tell me what the harm of that is? That's what the child said they wanted. You don't know, I guess theoretically, it is physically possible that the parent told the child to want that, but you have no proof of that. It's just as likely that the child said they wanted that. Like, again, this is an example where you're like, trust me, bro, you didn't bring up any proof.
That ideology is being pushed onto that child by their parents, and there is proof everywhere about this, okay?
Please show me some.
Jennings is one of those topics right now that's happening. This very, very crazy topic about it was a girl, born a boy, transitioned at 4 years old, then got a TV show out of this whole thing, got multiple, I think 3 to 4 surgeries to fix her problems. The mother recently came on her reality television show.
All right, let's talk about Jazz real quick. I looked this up because I wanted to be clear on what happened with Jazz. So Josh says that Jazz Jennings transitioned at 4 years old. When I looked it up, I saw that Jazz Jennings had gender confirmation surgery when she was about to turn 18. I looked at the timeline. She was born in 2000 and she had surgery in 2018. So that's not 4 years old. If you think 2000 to 2018 is 4 years, like, I get it, Josh. The pandemic has skewed with my perception of time as well. Sometimes I forget it's 2023. No, 2000 to 2018 is 18 years. That is not 4 years. So I'm not sure where you got that she transitioned at 4. If by that you mean that from age 4, she started expressing that she felt that she was a girl and wanted to start being called a name that seemed more feminine and started wanting to live in accordance with feminine gender roles and knew that she was going to want her body to transition that way as she grew up. Maybe she knew that since she was 4. Here's the thing too, like, a lot of kids when they're 4 years old, there's like imagine a 4-year-old girl who says, you know, when I grow up, I want to be a mommy. I plan to have children just like my mom did. I plan to one day have, like, or there's like a 4-year-old, let's say there's a 4-year-old whose mom is pregnant right now with her younger sister. And she says, oh, my mom's pregnant. She's going to have a baby. One day I'm going to grow up and have a baby too. A kid can know that. You hear a lot of stories of trans kids, like let's take a trans woman, for example, who could say when they were 4 that they imagine their future growing up to be a mom. That doesn't necessarily mean growing up to get pregnant. You can adopt the kids. There's plenty of ways to have kids that are not pregnancy. However, there are plenty of trans people that say, oh yeah, I visualize my future and I pictured myself growing up to look like my mom, growing up to be a woman, growing up to be a mom. There's something that you just know about yourself. There's something that when you visualize your future, you see it differently. For example, I remember being in like 4th grade and thinking about my future and talking about it with my friend. My friend was like, oh, I wonder what kind of husband I'll have in the future. And I was like, yeah, I wonder what kind of wife I'll have. Like, that was just a natural thing for me to say. When I was visualizing my future, I was like, I wonder if my wife will be someone who is really into sports, or if my wife will be someone who really likes to dress up nice. Like, I was starting to think about that. I don't have a wife, but when I was a kid, I was able to, and again, this was in the late 90s and early 2000s when there was not a lot of LGBT representation out there at all. Pretty much everything you saw on TV and read in books was a male and female couple getting together, but there was something in me that would say, like, and it wasn't even like I thought about it, I'd just be like, I wonder what kind of wife I want. And then I thought back on that and I was like, I wonder why I thought that, right? Like, there's something where you just visualize your future and you realize that there's assumptions that you have about yourself and ways that you see yourself. So if by that you mean that at 4 years old, Jazz was thinking about herself as being a girl and growing up to be a woman and things like that, yeah, maybe. But no, Jazz did not physically transition. She did not get surgeries at age 4. You can fact check this. It didn't happen. Anyway, let's continue about Jazz.
And was talking about the bottom surgery and how you have to dilate it. And if she doesn't dilate it, I'm going to go do it for her, and telling this all online.
Okay, here's something Josh and I can agree on. That is wildly inappropriate for her mom to say publicly, and I don't think it's right that Jazz was put in the spotlight like this. Same as I don't think it's right to put any kid in the spotlight. Like I said when I was reviewing Jeanette McCurdy's book, the ways that kids get put in the spotlight, the ways that parents exploit them, the ways that parents make money off of them, it leads to a lot of really abusive situations for kids. It puts a lot of pressure on them. Putting them in the spotlight and having their life be out there as a product for public consumption is not healthy. Josh, we agree on that 120%, dude. So I agree with you. The problem with Jazz is that people put her in the spotlight, that people tried to make this example out of her, that people tried to turn her into someone who was working for a cause rather than just letting her be the little girl that she is. So I think that Jazz was exploited, but I don't think that someone groomed her to be trans. I think she's a trans woman who was forced into a role from childhood of having to perform for people and put her life out there publicly. I don't think that's right to do to kids. I don't think we should be putting kids on reality TV or things like that. I think that's very, very wrong. Just like we agree on family vlogs. Completely agree that what was done to Jazz was wrong. However, allowing her to live her life as a woman and allowing her to transition and allowing her access to the medical services that she knew she needed, none of that was wrong. That was right for her. She is still a trans woman all these years later. She is a full adult. She is a woman in her 20s now, and she is still a trans woman.
I'm worried about like her mental well-being and her dilation. The minute she leaves my house, we have a dilation problem. I have woken Jazz out of a dead sleep and taken the dilator and put the lubrication on it and said, here, you take this and you put it in your vagina. If not, I will.
Okay, that's really inappropriate. I agree with Josh. This is uncomfortable. This is inappropriate. Her mom should not be saying this on TV. That's really gross.
But Jazz is bad, even when I'm home once a day. I would be so mad if she goes away to college and that thing seals up. I would wring her neck. Can you imagine?
Regardless,
I completely agree that her mom's being gross there, and that you shouldn't be putting your kid's medical history or things like that out there publicly. That's wrong. That's weird. Don't do it. Has nothing to do with her being trans. If Jazz were a child who was assigned female at birth and grew up to be a girl, and same thing, I would be criticizing her mom for the same thing. Here's something you may or may not want to know about me. I too used to have to dilate my vagina. I'm a cisgender woman. I was assigned female at birth. I've had a vagina since birth. I used to have to dilate it because I've had health problems. I wouldn't want my mom talking about that on public TV either, because that's not anyone else's choice to talk about other than the person themselves. So I agree that that's gross of her mom to talk about like that, but it has nothing to do with her being trans. It's irrelevant.
So what you think about this topic anyway? These kids cannot give informed consent to this story being shared in the world, which is obviously we're going to get to that with Jonathan's code.
I agree. They cannot give informed consent to the story being shared, whether or not they're LGBTQ. Has nothing to do with that.
Okay? It cannot be shared. It is not anybody's business what's going on. And your child cannot give informed consent to what's happening, and Jazz Jennings is a perfect example of that. If you look at Jazz Jennings, you cannot tell that Jazz was born a boy.
Yeah, because she is a trans woman. She is happy living her life as a woman, so...
looks like a girl. When she was 14, she looked just like any girl. You couldn't tell her apart at all.
Good for her. Sounds like she had a very good transition experience.
And that's a very convincing thing, but that all happened because the mom wanted that to happen.
Jazz's mom wanted to share her story publicly, which I agree was wrong. But Jazz herself knew she was trans. Jazz is an adult now. She's allowed, if she had been forced into being trans, she at any point has the ability to say that she's not really trans and that she was forced into it. And a second ago, Josh compared this to Munchausen by proxy, which is very weird, because let's think about Munchausen by proxy for a second. Let's say, for the sake of the argument, there exists some parent in the universe. I have yet to hear of them, but let's say that somewhere in the universe there exists a really awful parent who does pressure their kid into being trans and forces their kid to transition for clout. I would agree that that's a bad thing to do. Similar to how, for example, if you guys remember the Gypsy Rose Blanchard story with the mom who had Munchausen's by proxy whose daughter murdered her, remember that situation? In that situation, there was a mom forcing illnesses on her child, making her child physically ill because she wanted to pretend that her child was ill as a scam, right? Remember that? There are parents that do that, but there also are children with chronic illnesses. Same way that if at some point there was some parent out there that forced their child to be trans, that does not change the fact that there are some people who are actually trans.
Some people think that because she wanted a girl and she had 3 boys, she's turned the last one into a girl. But now if you look at what is happening with Jazz Jennings...
Some people think. That's a great source, Josh.
It seems like she's regretting everything that's happened. She's starting to wake up to what has really happened. She admittedly has an eating disorder and is ballooned by, she's up to 2...
What do you mean she's starting to wake up to what really happened? Someone having an ED does not mean that they don't want to be trans. Like, what are you talking about? How is that relevant? If she's having a tough time, that's awful. I feel bad for her. Someone can be trans and have a mental illness that is unrelated to them being trans. I am bisexual and I also have ADHD. Are those things related? No, they just both are things about me. I have curly hair and I'm also 5'6". Are those things related? Do I have curly hair because I'm 5'6"? Like, no. If she is dealing with an ED right now, that sucks, and I genuinely hope that she's able to get the help that she needs. If her mental health is struggling, I mean, my guess would be it's from having her life being put in the spotlight, but also, my guess doesn't matter because I'm not her therapist, and neither are you.
260 pounds or something like that. The stress and the pressure of the public eye on her at all times has been killing her.
The stress of the public eye. You're the one that said it, Josh, not me. Not being trans is what's making her miserable. The stress of the public eye is what's making her miserable. I agree. We should not be putting kids in the spotlight. We share that mission, dude.
And this mom has been raking in millions of dollars while doing this to her daughter. And it's actually the grossest thing I've ever seen, and that is exactly what is happening with Jonathan Scona-Jolie. Jonathan Scona-Jolie is trying to make Edie the new Jazz Jennings. And it's not appropriate, it is not right, it is disgusting. Kids...
So I don't know anything about this family, but if this person is putting their kid's transition in the spotlight, Josh, we agree 100%. This parent should not be doing that. That is wrong.
Aren't trans. And I can't...
Okay, kids aren't trans. What do you mean by kids? Is a newborn baby trans? No, I don't think so. A newborn baby, I don't think, can know exactly what it means to be who they are. Newborn babies don't have a sense of self-recognition yet. The same way that a newborn baby can't be gay or straight yet or anything, right? They don't have enough sense of themselves yet. When you say kids, though, can a 14-year-old be trans? Yeah, absolutely. That doesn't mean that 14-year-olds are getting genital surgeries, but there are 14-year-olds who are taking steps toward their transition, if that means presenting in a way that is trying to look like the gender that they're presenting as, or trying to, start seeking out medical services or making a plan for the future of how they're going to get hormone treatments or potentially doing a puberty blockers, which we can talk about puberty blockers in the future, but there's a lot of misinformation about those as well.
Wait to see all the comments on my hate thread. I can't wait.
Is that me you're talking to?
If you push that your kid comes to you and says one day I'm uncomfortable in my body, I don't think I am who I am, you have to look at the underlying, where is that coming from? And a lot of it
could be coming from a lot of places. One of those places could theoretically be that they're trans. Another place could be that they have body dysmorphia, which would mean if they're uncomfortable in their body and they're seeing it incorrectly, then maybe it's dysmorphia. Maybe they have dysphoria, but it's not gender dysphoria. Maybe the child is uncomfortable with something about their body, and then later in life they're going to choose to surgically alter that if they want to. You know, adults get nose jobs and things like that. I just did a video with my friend Brianna Jewell. There's on her channel. We talked on her channel about how both of us have had plastic surgery on our chests. We've both had boob jobs. We had them in the opposite way. I got breast reduction, she got breast implants. But both of us made our own choices about our own bodies to look how we wanted to look because that was our choice. When you feel uncomfortable in your body, the underlying cause may be due to something that can be fixed through some type of therapy, or it may be something that you want to fix physically yourself later on in your life. And maybe it is because that kid is trans. I'm not saying that's the only reason a child may be uncomfortable. I agree with you, Josh. You do need to look into the root causes. You do need to figure out what it is that's actually causing the child to feel that way. But you need to keep in mind that there is a non-zero possibility that it could be because they're trans. That's not to say there's a high possibility. Again, I agree with you. Trans people are a minority in the population. We know that. Cisgender people are the overwhelming majority of people. It is highly statistically likely that your kids will not be trans, but there is a possibility that they could be. And if they are, then you need to figure out what the best solution is for that situation specifically. That's why I say there is no one approach. There is no blanket statement to say, well, all parents should be required to do this, or all children should be required to do this. This is a thing that needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis with that child, the parents, and the doctor. It's not up to Josh. It's not up to people in Congress. It's not up to politicians. It's not up to that group of people to decide what are going to be blanket statements of what's going to work for everybody. An individual doctor is going to know that particular patient's medical history. They're going to know that particular patient, where their body is physically in terms of development, what specific symptoms they have, what the risk is in terms of how soon they might need certain treatments for things. It's going to vary wildly based on the individual. And because of that, I think that it is between doctors, patients, and if they are a minor, then the parents' decisions as well. I think that is all involved in the situation. It's not up to Josh. It's not up to me, and it's not up to politicians.
It's coming from schools, by the way, if you didn't know that. It absolutely is. They don't just...
Okay, it's coming from schools. You're right. It's all because of the gay English teachers like me that teach your kids pronouns like I, me, you, we, us. Because of that, I'm the cause of this. You're right.
Just out of the blue think, duh, holy, I'm this other thing. It's got to be implanted somewhere.
Our stay back went so well.
Wait, what do you mean it's got to be implanted somewhere? What about all the people that have been trans throughout history? Remember the Hays Code in movies? Like back in the day, movies were not allowed to show gender nonconformity or homosexuality unless it was in a villain role. Like that's why you had a lot of queer-coded villains, because if someone was going against gender norms, they had to be evil, so you'd show that that was bad. These things were the opposite of implanted. Kids were indoctrinated. If anything, the world was trying to push that being straight and being in line with traditional gender roles, that was the thing. That was what was being pushed on a lot of people. And people still turned out gay and still turned out trans. There have been trans people throughout history. Nowadays, trans people are more visible because there are more medical services available. People are able to actually pursue a type of change that would help them. Whereas in the past, those things weren't as available, or if they were available, they were very expensive. There were a lot of barriers in the way. Some people chose to just hide instead of risking being ostracized by society for something that they didn't even feel they had any power to fix anyway. But there still were people that did physically transition throughout history. One example, the Danish girl, Lily, she was born in the 1800s and medically transitioned. There's a book I read about a Civil War soldier named Albert Cashier, who was assigned female at birth. Now there's speculation, did this person pass as male because they wanted to fight in the Civil War? Or were they trans? There's a lot of speculation that they were trans because after the Civil War ended, they still chose to live the rest of their life being male and wanted to still go by their male name and wanted to still live as a man forever. My point is, those are just two I could think of off the top of my head, but there have been trans people throughout history. There's few examples that we can think of, but we don't remember most people, right? The majority of non-famous people die and fade into obscurity as well, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity.
Well, my kids are super sweet and talented. My favorite part of the day, though, was in the last class that I went to, there was a kid that says, oh my gosh, you're non-binary. So is my sister. Look at this picture of them. That's why I'm out. That's why I'm visible. That's why representation matters.
Okay, so in what way is this indoctrination? I guess this is a teacher. Oh, first of all, this is Libs of TikTok. Of course Josh is following Libs of TikTok. Anyway, so this person is sharing a story about how at their school, someone noticed that they were non-binary and they also had a non-binary sibling. So they were like, oh, cool, we can connect about that. Where did the indoctrination happen? This student introduced them to their non-binary sibling after that person already came out. So this kid already knew they were non-binary before they met this person. In what way did that person plant the seed in their head? I'm so confused.
A lot of people were asking in the comments of my last couple of videos about my anchor chart. My anchor chart's about my pronouns. It says, my name is Mixed Cogbill. My pronouns are Z, Zem, Zir, and Zirs. How to refer to Mixed Cogbill. Mixed C is my teacher. Z is multilingual. Students practice and speak Spanish with Zem. Zir hobby is learning languages.
Right?
So this person is also non-binary. I think part of the problem in the world is that we don't have, I guess until Mix MX, there wasn't really a gender-neutral honorific type of form. Like we have Mr. and Miss, and we have Sir and Ma'am. We didn't have one that wasn't gendered. So we needed to create one that wasn't gendered, so that's what was created. And if it catches on, that's how language evolves, right? If it gets used and catches on, then it'll catch on.
We are humans. And I'm not saying it doesn't always happen that way, and maybe there are people who do think that from a young age, but for the most part, especially in this day and age, it is a social contagion.
Okay. So you're saying there are people that know that they're trans without outside influence, but in this day and age, it's not all of them. Do you have any proof of that? You acknowledge that some people are actually just trans. What makes you think anyone's faking it then? Let's continue.
That is affecting our children, and that's when I step in and have a conversation about it. The increase in the amount of kids who are identifying as a different gender or whatever is something like 4,000%. And then you get people arguing, well, they've always been there. Have they? Because I grew up and I didn't know anybody like that.
You know what? Josh, you got me. You got me, Josh. That was a great point. You didn't know anyone trans growing up, therefore that means it must be a social contagion. I hadn't thought of it that way before. You know, now that you mention it, I can think of another situation that happened exactly like this. When my mom was growing up, going to Catholic school in the 1960s, she didn't know anyone who was left-handed. Actually, she almost knew a few people who were left-handed, but the nuns physically beat it out of them, so they weren't left-handed anymore. Nobody knew anyone left-handed back in the 60s because the nuns would beat it out of you. So, you're right. Being left-handed is a social contagion. You know, my friend RK is editing this video right now, and he's left-handed, and I think it's cool that he's left-handed, so I'm gonna try writing with my left hand from now on, and it's gonna work. You're right, Josh, it was a social contagion all along. No, my whole point is, back in the day, when there were no availabilities where you were going to risk severe discrimination by talking about this, or when some kids may have talked to their parents about going against certain gender norms and were punished for it, of course they were gonna stop that behavior, even if it meant having to suppress something and make themselves feel worse inside, right? If anything, kids are being indoctrinated to be not LGBTQ, right?
I am coming out hetero.
There were tomboys and there were effeminate men.
I get it. I was a tomboy growing up too. Now I'm a woman who lifts a lot of weights and likes to make out with women.
And then generally either they stayed that way or they grew out of it when they got older.
Or they were trans. Some of them weren't. Some of them, like, butch lesbians are a thing. There are plenty of women who grow up and continue to have masculine characteristics. There are men that grow up and continue to have feminine characteristics. And then there are people who transition because that's who they were. It's almost like there's just variation among people, and different people do different things. There's a difference between having interests and preferences that are outside of gender norms and actually wanting to change your gender and actually wanting to transition and get healthcare and get physical procedures done. Those are different things that go on. But they're both things that happen. I'm just on the side of accept everyone, dude. Just the whole thing that you're thinking kids are being groomed into this is so weird.
There's so many tomboys on Twitter think, thank God I didn't grow up in today's age. I would have been transitioned and had puberty blockers and had my boobs cut off and had a penis put on my body.
Not necessarily. The youngest vaginoplasty I saw was at 17, I think 18. I don't know. If anyone knows of a phalloplasty that's been done before 18, you can let me know. I've never seen it happen, though. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Just like how Josh never saw trans people when he was growing up doesn't mean they didn't exist. From what I've seen, it's like, no one's gonna put a penis on you. You have to give informed consent to have that happen. And you give informed consent as an adult to do that. Having your breasts cut off, I had about 10 pounds of breast tissue taken off of me, and it was important. I had dysphoria before that. I actually needed, it wasn't gender dysphoria, but again, I did have dysphoria. I needed to do that for my own mental and physical health. Nobody is going to do those things to you. You are going to make that choice. I don't get it. I don't get it, dude.
Right? That's exactly what's happened. They're saying, oh, you don't conform to gender norms, which they think is a made-up thing anyway, so then you must be the other gender. It doesn't even...
That's not what anyone thinks. I am a trans ally who was also a tomboy until I was 30. Now I'm embracing my feminine side more. But it took me till I was 30 to get there. So my whole point is, I have a lot of friends who are butch lesbians. And I have friends who are effeminate men. I have friends who are men with feminine qualities who are married to women. Like, it's not even always related to something about being LGBTQ in the first place. You can have those different interests. There is nobody out there who's saying if you have interests outside of gender norms, then you should have to physically transition. You need to show me who's saying that. It wasn't me. If it was someone else saying that, I'm going to disagree with them too. I agree with you. People shouldn't say that, but I just don't know anyone who is. This feels like a straw man. I feel like someone built a little scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz and is trying to talk to it like it's a human.
It's such a conundrum, it doesn't even make any sense. So the increase has happened, and children are now suffering because of it. If you don't think, then there is a huge number of detransitioners having a huge conversation right now, especially on Reddit. Go ahead and look at it. It's called detrans. Go.
Detransitioning is a thing that exists, yes. As I've shown sources for in the past, detransitioners, the overwhelming majority, will return to transitioning when later in life. In most cases, people who detransition are doing so because they are being ostracized too much, or because their parents are threatening to kick them out, or because they don't have the money to continue their treatments or things like that. So they detransition and they go back into the closet. That's a thing that happens. Now, Josh, you are absolutely right. There are people out there who transition and then later realize they were wrong and regret it and detransition. That does happen. However, first of all, it happens very rarely, but it does happen. And you're right. It does happen, and those people do deserve to tell their stories. Those people do deserve to have sympathy for the struggles that they're going through. And those people absolutely need access to medical services to go back to the way they were before. They need to have access to that. They need to be able to put their body how they want it, because a lot of those people are now experiencing dysphoria themselves because they realize that their body is not correct for them. And in fact, those feelings that a lot of detransitioners are feeling are what a lot of trans people before transition were feeling. So you know that the feeling of dysphoria of knowing that your body is wrong exists. Otherwise, why would a detransitioner ever even regret anything? What would you regret about it? Unless you can acknowledge that, yes, there is a way to know that your body is wrong. If someone transitions and realizes they're wrong, it's because they know that their body is now wrong. There is an internal sense you can have of that. Now, if someone wants to detransition, I agree. They deserve to tell their story. They deserve our sympathy. And they deserve access to medical services to be able to make that happen. But that doesn't mean that nobody should be allowed access to transition. I know people who have had breast implants, cisgender women who have had breast implants and later regretted it. Does that mean no women should ever be allowed to have breast implants? No, of course not, because there are plenty of women who have it and like it. I know people who get full tattoo sleeves and later regret it. Does that mean tattooing as an art should be illegal? No. At some point when an adult is making a decision for their own body, that is their choice. They are making that choice, and they should be allowed to make that choice. Now, Josh here seems to be conflating a couple different things where he's saying like, oh, but it's not their choice as an adult because people are pushing these things on our kids. Again, I haven't seen an example of it being pushed on kids. I've only seen trans people being made visible to kids as something that if that is who you are, that is nothing to be ashamed of. But no one's telling them that they have to be that way. Educating people about the fact that people who are different from you exist is not telling you to become that type of person. In fact, I don't think you can become trans. You either are or you aren't. And if someone misjudges and says that they aren't, it does happen every once in a while. And those people should have the access to services to be able to change back whatever they can. Let's continue.
Go read. Go read for yourself. Thousands and thousands of them who are convinced.
I hate this. One day, so guys, here, this is what's wild. I almost became a detransitioner. I don't even want to talk about it yet. One day I'll talk about it, I guess. I'm not ready to talk about it publicly yet. But I just hate people using detransitioner stories as a way to have some kind of argument against trans people. Bodily autonomy is so, so important. And LGBTQ visibility is not harmful to kids, and it actively is. I won't say transphobic or homophobic. It's overall just, I guess, queer-phobic, LGBTQ-phobic. It is harmful to the whole demographic of people that do things outside of gender norms or outside of the heteronormative marry the opposite gender and have 2.5 kids. People who go outside of that norm, it's harmful to all of them.
At a young age to do this are now very much upset with what they had to do. If you're brave enough, go look at what a phalloplasty is. Cut the skin off your arm.
Okay, well, you said if you're brave enough and then went and showed me a picture right away. Yes, this is a surgical procedure. If you're brave enough, I can show you the pictures of what some of my scars looked like right after my breast reduction surgery. Yes, showing things from a surgical procedure is always going to look disturbing. As humans, we evolve to not think that people having injuries looks good because you understand what I'm saying? Like we evolve to be weirded out by injuries and corpses and things like that because it sets off an alarm that there's danger. Obviously, showing surgical procedures is going to make people uncomfortable. I have scoliosis and I didn't need spine surgery, but I almost did, so I ended up looking at spinal surgery pictures. They were also terrifying. If you can stomach it, go look at what scoliosis surgery looks like. Yeah, Josh, medical procedures are gross to look at. Why most people don't become a doctor.
Arm. And it looks crazy, and they turn that into a penis. And kids are being castrated. And I know people are like, oh, it's not happening with kids. It absolutely, Janet Jennings is a perfect example. 17 years old, she had her surgery.
Okay, so you do admit that she had it at 17. Okay, so she was going to turn 18. I looked this up. She was going to turn 18 like 3 months after that. So if she'd waited 3 months, that would have just been the whole difference. I guess if we have a time machine, we can go back in time and ask Jazz to wait 3 months so that you don't have such an issue with this. Again, this is a situation that was between her parents, and her doctor, and they determined that at 17 it was okay to do. Kids get medical procedures at a variety of ages. Here's another example I like to give, right? There's a lot of kids out there who struggle with learning because they have ADHD and they get prescribed Adderall. Adderall is a medication that can elevate your heart rate. It is a stimulant, and if you abuse it, it can become addictive and can do bad things to your body. But there are kids who get prescribed it because under the supervision of a doctor in a controlled dose, with the doctor monitoring to make sure that no bad side effects happen, it can be very helpful to their mental health and also to their learning and their education and things like that. So if a doctor is monitoring this the whole time and is making sure that the child or the adult or whoever is going through this safely and has determined that this is a good course of action for that patient, I don't see why you should be the police on whether or not this happens. I don't see what business this is of yours whatsoever.
Now let's talk about puberty blockers a little bit, because we're going to get to this video with Jonathan Scotto taking his kid to a gender clinic.
Okay, puberty blockers. Yeah, we'll talk about puberty blockers. I'll wait to see what Josh has to say about them first.
Everybody thinks, well, they have to go through these gender clinics, they have to go to these people, and they have to go through these professionals to get this. But if you take your kid to a gender clinic, do you think a gender clinic is going to be like, no, we don't think this is true? No.
Okay, fine, I'll talk about it. When I thought I was trans, I went to a psychiatrist about this when I was 26 years old. And I didn't seem certain. So my psychiatrist did not refer me to getting any hormone treatment. Instead, he told me to double my dosage of my OCD medicine. It helped a little bit, and then I got breast reduction, and then I felt completely better, and I didn't feel like I needed anything further. That's what I experienced at 26. Because if you are not sure, they are not handing out hormones to you there. You are going through a process with a medical professional where they are evaluating you. You know, oh, do we think gender clinics would turn people away? Yep. If they don't think that this is going to be the best move for that child at that time, yeah. But they're going to also help that child work through what's going on with them. And some of those people are going to end up being trans and some are not. That's the way that the world works.
Gender clinic is there, and those people exist in those clinics to affirm it, not to deny it. So when you say I take my kid to these doctors and these people, those people are only there to affirm.
Okay, so this right here, first of all, Josh searched gender clinics for affirmation. That's what the search term says at the top. So he specifically searched for that. Second of all, he's circling the sponsored results. If your issue here is the way that Google is allowing things to be sponsored and that's controlling the flow of information, that's just a commentary on capitalism, my dude. At the end of the day, the issue with that is Google will take whoever pays the most to get to the top of the page for profit. This has nothing to do with trans people or gay people or anything. This is capitalism.
You're not getting a proper diagnosis at all. I'm going to be talking about Eugenia Cooney soon, because I just saw a video that broke my heart. In my opinion, if you think that a child who has gender dysphoria should be affirmed in that gender dysphoria by having healthy breast cut off or having medicine that stops puberty or that castrates...
I'd like to remind you all that I, as a cisgender woman, had healthy breast cut off, and my life is so much better for it. Now, it's not going to be true for everybody, but that's why bodily autonomy is important.
Or anything like that, you would then have to agree that Eugenia Cooney wants to be what she is and that is healthy and that's okay.
Nope, I would not have to agree with that because, as I just laid out like 3 times in this video, body dysmorphia means that you will never be able to see your body accurately until the dysmorphia is treated. You can't treat dysmorphia physically because you are not accurately assessing what's physically wrong with your body because the entire disease is telling you you're incapable of it. Meanwhile, dysphoria, you know what your body looks like and you know what you want it to look like, and when you change it to that, trans people already know what genitals they have. They already know if they have breasts or not. They already know if their voice is higher or lower than they want it to be. They already know these things about themselves and they see it and analyze it accurately. They change it to what they want it to be, right? There's a difference in the perception versus reality. And if you can't see that, this is just completely illogical. You're not capable of facts and logic if you can't see this.
I conflate the two because both of those things are something that's wrong with your brain. Both are wrong.
Okay. Schizophrenia and ADHD are both things that happen in your brain. Does that mean they should be treated the same? Brain cancer and depression are both things that can happen in your brain. Does that mean we treat them medically the same way? No! When you're talking about 2 different conditions, you will treat them differently. These are different situations. Just because 2 things are both things that are happening within your brain. Oh my God. He actually hasn't thought this through at all.
Neither of them should be affirmed. That's what I believe. And I know, again, might get me canceled. At this point, this conversation...
Again, I don't want you to be canceled. I want you to just actually listen to people who are trying to talk to you about this. I am anti-canceling people because I firmly believe with everything in my heart that everyone is capable of learning new things. I believe that everyone has blind spots that in the future, when they look back on, they will say, I was wrong about this. It's happened to me many times. I've been wrong about a lot of things. I've had friends that have been wrong about a lot of things. I've had people in my family that have been wrong about a lot of things, and they've changed my mind about things. I've changed their mind about things. This is how being a human works. I don't want you to be canceled, and I don't believe that you should be cast as like a bad person or be labeled as transphobic for life or anything like that. And if Josh did listen to these things and did eventually change his opinion on this, I would make a video saying that I now support him and I support what he's doing. I've done it in the past. You guys remember? I made a video talking, like when Rachel Hollis started talking about how MLMs are bad, I made a video specifically saying, hey, if you want to join the anti-MLM side of things, I'm going to welcome you with open arms into that community. Things like that, because I believe that people should be welcomed when they're willing to make a change. So no, Josh, I don't want you to be canceled. I want you to be willing to listen. There's a huge difference, okay? Dude, I haven't filmed a video this long since my Prince Harry review. That's wild. Anyway, let me know what you guys think about the whole situation going on with Dad Challenge podcast in the comments below. Again, like I said, I really just wish Josh would listen. I really wish that he would listen and be open to learning about these things and learning how things aren't as simplistic, things aren't as black and white or yes or no or binary, God forbid I say that. That he could learn that things are just not as simple as that, and that humans and human variation is so much more complicated. But I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope that maybe you learned something from it. Either way, I will see you guys again soon. In the meantime, though, keep on supporting small businesses, keep supporting the LGBTQ community, and have a fantastic start to your day. Bye!
Be curious, not judgmental.
Get you some nuts.
Yeah, you effing.
Up yours, woke moralist. We'll see who cancels who.